Hi everyone, thanks for popping in with me, Nikki B. Let's get it streaming.
Because when you're scared to death, your life is about to change, and you've got an attorney next door that you will not permit that family to consult with that attorney, you got an issue. Case number 2, 2-year-old American daughter, also deported to Honduras. They were also denied access to their lawyers. According to her lawyer, ICE prevented the mother from speaking to the lawyer or anyone else in the family. 2-year-old American citizen. Can't we slow it down and just take a moment before they're deported in 24 hours? The mom didn't want the daughter to stay in the United States. They may have had relatives in the United States, family. Even the own Trump-appointed federal judge overseeing this case has said that he had a strong suspicion that the government just deported a U.S. citizen with no meaningful due process. Madam Secretary, I think we're all in agreement here. Let's go after MS-13. Let's go after drug dealers. Let's go after Tren de Grúa. The bad folks who hurt my community as well as everybody else's community. But I fail to see where a child, 2-year-old, 4-year-old, 7-year-old children could be on your top of priorities for deportations. This is still America. Due process, the Fifth Amendment. Madam Secretary, I know ICE agents. I deal with them all the time. I've toured the southern border, blue uniforms, green uniforms, talking to them about what they need to do the job. More than happy to have that discussion with you, publicly or privately, but deporting U.S.-born children, ignoring their attorneys? Take a deep breath. You've been here 20, 30 years. A lot of the times back home, when I ask the ICE agents, give them 30 days, you know what? Without fail, that person comes back or self-deports. We can do better. Madam Secretary, I'm going to ask you one last question in 9 seconds. You're under oath. Have you fired, retired, dismissed any DSA agents that have not followed your policies?
What kind of agents, sir?
DHS,
DHS
Homeland Security agents. Yes.
Specific law enforcement officers?
Yes, ma'am. Officers under your watch.
I haven't given any specific orders to any law enforcement officers under the Department of Homeland Security. So there are within the Department of Homeland Security 280,000 employees. 47,000 of them are Coast Guard individuals. So 230,000 individuals are employees, and we're very proud of the work that they do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for recognizing that it's Police Week. We have many agencies that have law enforcement officers in them that get up every single day to serve their communities and to make sure that our laws matter and that they're enforced appropriately and that no one is treated differently than someone else.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Guest from Mississippi.
Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter for the record the Prince George's County Police Department gang field interview sheet in Maryland, where from 2019, where they interviewed Kilmar Abrego Garcia and identified through his clothing that he and his statements that he is indeed an MS-13 gang member.
Without objection.
I'd also ask unanimous consent to enter for the record an article that quotes Kilmar Abrego's wife stating, "I am afraid," with another protective order filing against deported Maryland man championed by the Democrats. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Without disagreement, we'll put that one in as unanimous consent. You're recognized.
Mr. Chairman, if you have it, I would like to introduce by unanimous consent a court order establishing that Kilmar Abrego Garcia is a member of MS-13.
You're submitting what for unanimous consent?
Well, there isn't one, so I'm wondering if you have one.
I do not have that. Okay. Are we ready to go on with the next testimony? Mr. Guest, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, thank you for being here. Thank you for your leadership. Please thank the men and women that serve under you for the incredible job that they do. I want to particularly thank you for enforcing the law, something that we did not see under the previous administration. In the short time that you have been serving as secretary, we have seen a dramatic decrease, as much as 95% along our southern border. And I also want to thank you for locating the 5,000 plus missing children that just in 3 months you and your agency have been able to find, and in some cases possibly rescue them from what could have been very dangerous situations. Echo what Congressman Higgins talked about a minute ago. The law has not changed since you have become secretary. The budget has not changed since you've become secretary. The resources that you have, the number of agents have not changed since you've become secretary. But yet we have seen a dramatic decrease in the number of border crossings because you and the men and women who serve under you have chosen to enforce the law. I want to push back a little bit on some of the narratives that are being put out by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. First is the allegations, the reckless allegations, which are completely false and untrue, that you and your agency are deporting American citizens. And I heard you try to answer that question. I don't know if you were able to get that answer out there. And so I want to give you that opportunity. But as I understand the situation, we were deporting an illegal alien who was a parent, and that parent then decided to make the decision to take their children with them. And so I don't know if my friends on the other side of the aisle would ask that we separate those and say, no, those parents cannot do that the federal government knows better, and that these children are going to have to stay in the United States. Or maybe they believe that a parent who is an illegal that has a child therefore is going to be allowed to remain here indefinitely, regardless of whether or not there's a final removal, regardless of whether there are any criminal charges or anything pending against those individuals. And so in the instances that have been brought up, Madam Secretary, where there have been allegations that you or your agency has removed American citizens, I just want to give you a brief opportunity to address that. Is that true? And if it's not true, please tell us and please share with this committee the truth behind those situations.
Congressman, the children that were referenced previously in the testimony of the gentleman, in both of those cases, the mothers chose to keep their children with them when they returned home to their home country. That is a priority of President Trump, to keep families unified. We have instances where mothers from other countries have decided that their children should stay here in the United States and left them with family members or someone else that they trusted. But these two mothers that they were referencing earlier decided to take their children home with them and wanted to return to their home countries as a family.
And so we are giving the parents the choice, and then we are honoring whatever their request. Is that what I understand from you, Madam Secretary?
That is correct, sir.
All right, and then want to talk about one more issue in the last minute and a half that I have, this issue of due process. Where you were asked earlier, are we giving individuals due process? And you talked about the fact that we are complying with the law that Congress has given the department. And I think specifically, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think you're talking about the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act of 1996 that created this process known as expedited removal. And we know that that law in 1996, that it passed Congress overwhelmingly, at both the House and the Senate. I will tell you that I see here a comment that was made by that time President Clinton, and this is what President Clinton said about that law. It said, President Clinton asserted that the legislation strengthened the rule of law by cracking down on illegal immigration at the border, in the workplace, and in the criminal justice system without punishing those living in the United States legally. And so as I understand it, as it relates to the issue of due process, you are following the law as Congress gave you almost 30 years ago. And this Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigration Responsibility Act has been upheld repeatedly over the last 30 years by the court. You're enforcing final orders of removal. And so, Madam Secretary, in the last 10 seconds that I have, are you following the law, and are you giving these individuals the due process that you are required to give them?
Yes, Congressman, we are using the due process tools that Congress has afforded us in these instances to ensure that everyone is treated the same and appropriately.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes.
Madam Secretary, on April 24th, a woman in Louisiana was deported along with her 7-year-old daughter and 4-year-old son, both of whom were U.S. citizens. The 4-year-old son had stage 4 cancer. Now, you just stated under oath that the mother consented to having her U.S. citizen children removed. But I have spoken with the attorney for that U.S. citizen child with stage 4 cancer. She has also made numerous statements to the press in which she stated unequivocally that at no time did the mother consent to her U.S. citizen children being removed. What evidence do you have to support your claim that she did consent?
Congressman, we followed the same policies and procedures
What
for
evidence
every
do you
individual,
have?
and we
What
have
evidence do you have
We have
that she,
documentation that
what
that mother-
documentation do you
We will
have
get
that mother
We will
consented?
get that to you, sir. I don't have it with me
Please do.
today,
I
but
understand
that
it's
mother
hard to keep them all
consented
straight
to
because you've
take her
deported
child with
multiple
her.
U.S. citizen children, but I'm asking specifically about the 4-year-old with cancer who was deported on April 25th. For the record, that family was also not given access to legal counsel before they were deported, even though their lawyer was in the same building at the time. I'm holding in my hands here a document called ICE Directive 11064, Interests of Non-Citizen Parents and Legal Guardians of Minor Children. This is the policy for how ICE agents should handle situations like this. It states unequivocally that parents and legal guardians should have the ability to make alternative care arrangements for minor children prior to their arrest or detention, and that ICE must afford parents the opportunity to consult with legal counsel. So, did the ICE agents working on this case who deported this 4-year-old with cancer of their own volition fail to follow ICE policies, or were they directed to by your office or anyone else in DHS leadership?
Sir, this mother chose to keep her child with her.
You have not produced any evidence
when
to say so,
return
but I'm
back to
asking
her
again,
home
have you
country,
directed,
and that
have
is
you
the
directed
priority of
DHS
President Trump is
officers
keep
to
families
ignore
unified
this
together. It's
policy?
very different than the previous
right.
administration. The previous administration
On March
separated families
15th,
over and over
reclaiming
and
my
over
time,
again.
on March
This
15th,
is a
your
change.
department sent 3 airplanes to El Salvador. Those planes carried approximately 261 individuals who were imprisoned upon arrival. Did you personally review and approve the names of those 261 individuals before they were sent?
Sir, we have deported and sent home
Did
thousands
you
of individuals.
review the names of those individuals?
And we have individuals that have the
Why won't you answer the
responsibility
question?
within the Department of
Are you
Homeland
aware
Security.
of whether those 261 individuals were given the opportunity to speak with a lawyer or appear before a judge before they were put on those planes? Yes or no?
Sir, every single individual followed the exact same process. that
They
we
were
follow
not
for everyone
all,
who's
they
in
were
this-
not all given
in
the
this country
opportunity to appear
illegally.
before a judge or speak with a
was
lawyer. On
treated the
April
same.
7th, the Supreme Court ruled that detainees must have an opportunity to have a hearing before they are deported. Are you familiar with the April 7th Supreme Court ruling?
am.
Can you assure us that in the future you will abide by that Supreme Court ruling to provide detainees with a hearing before they are
We're
deported?
following all judges' orders. Yes, sir.
I have a photograph here of André Hernandez Romero, a gay makeup artist from Venezuela. He fled Venezuela fearing gang violence because of his opposition to the Maduro dictatorship and his sexual orientation. He presented himself at a port of entry and requested asylum. His claim was found to be credible, and he was placed in detention to await a full hearing. But he never received a full hearing because you put him on one of those planes to El Salvador, where he still is today. Listen to me. He had no criminal record in the United States or in any other country. He did not even enter the country illegally. He presented at a port of entry. He tried to do it the legal way. And to this date, the only evidence your department has presented to justify his imprisonment is that he had 2 tattoos, one that said mom and one that said dad. Do you have any other evidence to present for why this individual should be locked up in El Salvador?
Sir, every case is used
Do you have
the
any-
same protocols and the same processes and inputs.
Do you have any
that
evidence
that
other than the
law enforcement
tattoos that say
officers
mom
use in
or
criminal
dad for why
cases?
this
So it's
individual
not
should be
just
locked
on
up?
tattoos. It's who they're affiliated with, their communication.
You have not
who they're
presented
spending
any
time
other
with,
evidence,
criminal
nor has your
activities.
department.
The cases
Reclaiming
go
my time,
exactly the
during
same
your
as it was
confirmation
whenever-
hearing, you said your focus would be on deporting immigrants who have been convicted of crimes and those who have received removal orders. But that is not what you have been doing. Instead, you have been deporting children with cancer, children who are U.S. citizens, a gay makeup artist who committed no crime and didn't even enter the country illegally, You have been sloppy. Your department has been sloppy, and instead of focusing on real criminals, you have allowed innocent children to be deported while you fly around the country playing dress up for the cameras. Instead of enforcing the laws, you have repeatedly broken them. You need to change course immediately before more innocent people are hurt on your watch.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize...
Mr. Chairman, sorry. I ask unanimous consent to enter for the record. One of our colleagues had asked if there was evidence if the so-called Maryland man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, was MS-13. According to the Attorney General of the United States, she posted that the evidence shows Kilmar Abrego Garcia has repeatedly been identified as a member of MS-13 by a Maryland County Police Gang unit, which I introduced for the record, a reliable confidential informant, ICE officers, an immigration judge agreed, and an appellate board agreed.
Without...
So you have, is that a court order? Well, I object.
No, she can put anything she wants in the record. She's not complying to your request, Mr. Goldman.
She asked for unanimous consent.
Okay, so you're objecting to her putting that into the record?
I am objecting subject to a clarification. Is that a court order that establishes that he's a member of MS-13?
An immigration judge agreed that he was MS-13.
For
An
bail
appellate,
purposes.
an appellate board agreed.
Don't misrepresent.
Hold on,
A
we're not...
judge.
Everybody pause. We're going to let one person talk at a time. You ask a question, answer the question, please.
According to the Attorney General of the United States, she informed the country that an immigration judge agreed that your Maryland man, Kilmar Abrego Garcia, is MS-13. An appellate board agreed. ICE officers
You are misstating what the...
a reliable
Mr. Goldman,
informant.
the clock is not yours right now. She has the floor. Please continue answering the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A Maryland County
She's not answering the question, sir.
No, she's going to answer the question, and then you can object to her answer.
Make sure that she answers the question?
Finish answer. You just said, please, finish your answer.
A Maryland County Police Gang unit agreed that he's MS-13. A reliable confidential informant agreed that he's MS-13. ICE officers agreed that he's MS-13. An immigration judge agreed that he's MS-13. An appellate board agreed that Kilmar Abrego Garcia, your Maryland man, is MS-13.
Okay.
I
You have
object.
the floor. What do you want to say?
I object because she is misstating the record and the facts. That is not accurate, and therefore I object to that being introduced. There is no...
Mr.
Sir, can
Chairman?
I explain? You let her go on.
Go ahead.
There is no final court order establishing that he's a member. Maybe he is, so you should put all that evidence before a judge, and if he is MS-13, he should be deported. That's what we're talking about, but you're misstating what all of that evidence is.
No, I think I'm going to make a point here. You basically just read what the Attorney General said, correct?
Yes, sir.
You didn't assert that this was a court order, did you? Did you assert that this was a court order?
I read the Attorney General of the United States.
And you have a right on our committee to submit for unanimous consent or a vote if we want to put it to a vote. This for the record, correct? Is that it?
Yes.
That is correct. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
she has a right.
Can I review what she is submitting?
No, she can submit something to this committee.
But it matters that she just said she represented exactly what the Attorney General said. She has a document there. I would like to see that document.
Let's make a copy for
see if her
everybody,
representation-
and we'll vote on. I'm going to hold on just a second. We're going to hold. You're calling for the question? We're calling for the question. The clerk, we're going to need to set. Hold on just a second. Brief recess.
Please, let's get this on the historical record.
This is great.
We voted for
All right, there's
Mr. Higgins, I'm just asking
hold
to
on.
see the document.
I have the floor. All right, so we have a motion to vote on the submission of this for the record. That's all that has been stated. And
I have a parliamentary inquiry, sir.
Do not interrupt me again. We are on the vote on whether or not this can be entered into the record. A motion has been made, and we will vote on that motion. All of those in
I have
favor.
a parliamentary inquiry before we vote, sir.
Mr. Ranking Member.
It's our request that we object. And in the middle of the objection, you consider a motion, which...
He was done talking about Ms.
No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. You stopped him from talking.
I just have a parliamentary inquiry.
A parliamentary inquiry. Okay, go ahead. You have the floor.
Is it the procedure of this committee that someone who is making an objection to the admission of evidence cannot review that evidence before we vote on it?
Yeah, the content is irrelevant to the motion, and the motion has been made to vote on the submission for the record.
The content is irrelevant? I mean, that's what I'm objecting to. If she is accurate in what her representation is, I will withdraw my objection. I just need to see the document.
Somebody walk the thing over there and let him read it. I mean, get to the bottom of this quickly. We'll hold on your vote, Mr. Ogles.
Mr. Chairman, given that this is a tweet from the Attorney General that is effectively, I believe, consistent with what Ms. Taylor Greene says, I withdraw my objection.
Gentleman withdraws his objection. I now recognize, who's up? Mr. Jimenez for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for the fine work that you've done. I also want to thank you for approving the members on this side of the aisle, and myself included, in our assertion through the last 4 years that what happened at the southern border was done willfully and purposely by the Biden administration, because nobody could be that dumb. Do you share that opinion?
Sir, I believe it was a decision made by the previous president to not enforce our laws and to allow an invasion of our country.
So all the claims by the other side of the aisle that we needed more money for the Biden administration, we need more people, et cetera, do you believe that was accurate, or do you believe that was inaccurate?
No, sir, that was not true.
That's absolutely, because the numbers speak for themselves. And simply by enforcing our laws and having the will to enforce our laws, we've seen a dramatic fall in the number of crossings. And so I want to thank you for that. Now I want to switch over to FEMA. I used to be the mayor of Miami-Dade County. I used to represent, and really it was my job to protect 2.8 million people in one of the most hurricane-prone areas of the United States. I was also a city manager of the city, and I was a fire chief of the city of Miami, and at the time I was also on a FEMA advisory panel. And I can tell you that FEMA needs many, many reforms. I remember as mayor of Miami-Dade County in 2015, we were still processing claims through FEMA for Hurricane Katrina, which happened 10 years earlier. And so while I do support the efforts to reform FEMA, there are certain states and cities and counties that actually can respond a heck of a lot better than others. And we can't leave those that can't fend for themselves, to fend for themselves. And so I would hope that that's part of your review and the reform of FEMA. Is that what you plan to do?
Yes, sir. We know that every single state is not prepared today to take over their emergency operations. That's why the president has been clear that he wants to empower states, give them the opportunity to build out their response, to also sign MOUs with surrounding states and other resources they can use to best serve their people. He just doesn't believe that FEMA has been successful in being there in a time of crisis for people.
And I can tell you, ma'am, as mayor of Miami-Dade County, that they haven't. Okay, and that I never, ever, when I talk to my people, I said, hey, we're gonna have to do this ourselves. Right. There is no cavalry coming from the federal government. We have to take care of ourselves. All we need from the federal government really is the money to reimburse us. And you're not even good at doing that, okay? And so hopefully you can speed that process up. There are some people in my community that are a little bit concerned about the TPS rules and the suspension of TPS. I would request that you can meet with myself, Representative Mario Diaz-Balart, and Maria Salazar, so maybe we can do a little nuance to this so that we can put those concerns at rest. I also sent a letter to you concerning 100 Cuban oppressors. They're actually living in the United States. They were granted either asylum or entry into the United States that should have never been here. And we need to deport those. Have you received that letter? Or what's your department doing about looking into and vetting those 100 names that I gave you?
Yes, sir. I received your letter and read it this week, and will be responding to you. And that is something that President Trump is focused on, is adding integrity back to the programs that we have. Our immigration programs, our services like TPS, like the visa waiver program, our parole, our asylum programs, a lot of those got perverted and changed and misused and abused during the last administration. And adding integrity back to them is incredibly important for this administration. TPS was always meant to be a temporary program.
I agree.
Built on giving people an opportunity to be safe from violence or environmental crisis that may be happening in their home country. Those individuals, we're working with them, and we'll have a chance to meet with you and the other congressmen to address their needs and see what their options are. They do have 60 days from the time it is published. Those individuals that you spoke to me about, that still has not been published in the Federal Register, so they have several months here that we can work on the solutions to make sure that they're in a program that's appropriate for their situation.
Fair enough, ma'am. I appreciate that, and I hope we can have that meeting soon. Finally, I'm going to give you another example. When I was mayor of Miami-Dade County, there was then Senator Kamala Harris and a lot of other Democrats were demonstrating outside a homestead facility that was meant for children, saying how bad the conditions were, et cetera, et cetera. Well, as mayor of Miami-Dade County, I asked to actually go in there. I viewed it. I went in there. Since I speak Spanish, I actually spoke to the children. They're all being treated great. There was nothing happening there that would make me ashamed to be an American. And so what was great about that, it was that we were actually taking care of those children, unlike what happened under the Biden administration, where we lost about 300,000 of them. With that, I yield back. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Goldman for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to go back to Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case, Madam Secretary. But my first question for you is a pretty simple one. It's basic civics. Which branch of government does the Constitution give the authority to interpret what the law is, the judiciary or the executive branch?
Sir, going forward, the interpretation of the law, you make the laws in this body. The judicial branch makes sure that they have integrity and they're applied properly to individuals.
So okay, so I'm just going to take that as the judiciary branch. Now, let's focus for a second on what the judiciary branch has said about this case. We know the Supreme Court has said 9-0 that, notwithstanding your statements under oath here today, that Mr. Kilmar Abrego Garcia was afforded due process, he was in fact not afforded due process, because then if he were, you would have seen the withholding order that did not permit him to be deported to El Salvador. Now you allege, and I guess the Attorney General alleges, that he's a member of MS-13. That may very well be the case. And if he is, now that that is a foreign terrorist organization, certainly the immigration laws would allow him, and in fact require him, to be deported. I certainly would support that. But the problem that we have here is what you allege, what Ms. Green alleges, what the Attorney General alleges, is not the judiciary. You don't get to decide whether or not he is an MS-13 member. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Judge Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, very conservative, addressed this argument. He said, the government asserts that Abrego Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident in its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Will you commit right now to give Mr. Abrego Garcia that process where you can prove your allegation that he is a member of MS-13?
Congressman, that judge that you just quoted did not say he was not a member of MS-13. Who did say that he was a member of MS-13 was law enforcement officers that encountered this individual.
Yeah, he knows
We had
that.
a
This is a Fourth
judge, an
Circuit judge. He
immigration
knows
judge,
all
that
of what the evidence is, and
a
he's saying
case
if that
was
evidence.
built against
So you're not going to commit
before he
to
was deported
follow this
here
order. You won't
that
commit to
said he
follow
was
this court order.
MS-13. By the way, he identified
Madam Secretary,
himself.
I
Who he was
reclaim my
surrounded
time.
with.
Stop
He was
filibustering.
surrounded. He
Stop
was
filibustering.
surrounded by gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abrego Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abrego Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately,
So he-
sir, and he is not.
How can
in
you
this
say he's
country
been
anymore.
treated
For
appropriately
advocacy,
if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0, 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately? Why is your opinion better
we had
and
two
have more authority than the Supreme Court?
investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13 and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
No,
is
no, no, no.
investigators and law
That is
enforcement
you
officers
making
and
that
the case they built
determination.
against him. If you don't
The
trust our law
court
enforcement
has
officers
considered all that.
and
The judge has
investigators,
considered all that,
then
Madam
who do you
Secretary.
trust if you
And if
don't
you would be
trust judges?
quiet because I'm reclaiming my time, you are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to allow him to get due process?
Abrego Garcia is in his home country.
What
If he were to come
steps
back,
have
your
you
advocacy-
taken?
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him.
Yes, you
I'm
are.
advocating for a
Absolutely.
court order, Madam
Gone to the
Secretary.
mat for this
The
man
court
who has
order
terrorized
says
people
that
in
you must
traffic
take
with human
steps
beings.
to follow the court order. You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant to this court order?
It's got to be extremely discouraging to be one of your constituents. To see you fight for a terrorist like this and not fight for them is extremely alarming to me.
I'm fighting for
I'm sure
due
it is to my
process.
constituents as
And
well.
that's under the Constitution.
The gentleman's
and you
time
should
has
fight too for due
expired.
process.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Green for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Democrats have spent the last 4 years terrorizing Americans with their open border policies. They flooded our communities with over 13 million illegals from over 170 countries and territories who invaded our borders, raped our women and children, and murdered our own people. It's shocking to hear them to continue to defend cartels, MS-13, and terrorists today. Democrats claimed over and over again that legislation was needed to fix the problems that they created, yet to this day, no new border legislation has been enacted, and border crossings are down 93%. It was just reported that according to CBP, only 5 aliens were temporarily released into the United States in all of April. Only 5. This is compared to the 68,000 released in April of 2024 under the Biden administration. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for your great work and your leadership. This is truly saving America. There's nothing Democrats love more than defending the cartels, the criminals, and the rapists, and now we finally have a president in the White House and an administration that defends the American people. As you're aware, Secretary Noem, CISA previously developed a censorship laundering scheme through its counter mis, dis, and malinformation, MDM, efforts that suppress conservative opinions and went after President Trump's supporters. Members of Congress, senators, including myself, were permanently banned. I was permanently banned on Twitter under this. What started as an election interference campaign eventually developed into censoring issues well beyond the election and COVID and climate change. Through their NGO partnerships, tickets were created on posts they thought were misinformation and subsequently sent to social media platforms with recommendations for them to be censored. Would you please provide an update on your efforts to investigate the severity of MDM efforts during the Biden regime And what steps are you taking to ensure CISA will never again serve as the United States government's Ministry of Truth?
No, thank you, Congressman. The CISA definitely was so far off mission, they forgot what their purpose clearly was. The CISA was created to hunt down bad actors and to harden our systems, to support local infrastructure, critical infrastructure that makes this country run, and those small and medium-sized businesses that don't have the resources to make sure that their software programs, their technology was secure from hackers and from bad actors around the world. Instead, what they were doing by out there deciding what was truth, what wasn't truth, censoring what people could say, was not their mission whatsoever. And so we have stopped those activities. We have refocused our resources back onto the cybersecurity mission and ensured that CISA is cooperating with our local and state individuals and businesses to make sure that we're truly being proactive at not just hardening our systems, but stopping the attacks that we have from countries that hate us. So the Ministry of Truth, as what CISA was operating before, was wrongful actions that were taken by employees of this administration, the last administration, to go after political targets, to manipulate the information that Americans were receiving, and that has stopped. We have fallen far behind in what we've been able to do as far as cooperating with other intelligence agencies and with those at the state level to make sure that we're being proactive. And that's one thing that we have focused extremely hard on in the last several months, is ensuring that those relationships are built back up, that we're partnering with private businesses to get the support that we need to make sure that we are hardening America's systems, because we're vulnerable to our weakest link. And oftentimes our weakest link is that small business or individual that ties into our largest systems.
Yes, thank you. No American should be censored by their government for their political beliefs and their statements. Thank you for that. Also, the Trump administration has committed to reuniting unaccompanied alien children lost or trafficked under the Biden-Harris administration back to their families and guardians. What efforts is DHS taking to ensure that these vulnerable children are safely reunited with their loved ones? Because the Biden administration lost hundreds of thousands of children.
Yes, absolutely. We know that there was upwards to over 300,000 children that were lost during the last administration. So President Trump has made it a priority of every cabinet secretary and agency to make sure those children are located, that they are returned to safety. As you know, the refugee program and sponsors were greatly abused under the previous administration, and the Department of HHS is bringing some integrity back to that program and making sure that these children are cared for appropriately, and that someone is watching over them that truly has their best interests at heart, that really truly cares for them as a family member. I would say over 5,000 have been found, and our HSI individuals and law enforcement officers are continuing to identify them.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Ramirez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, it's good to see you. I'm going to go straight to the questions because I have a lot of them. Let me start just following up with Congressman Goldman about judiciary. Do you agree that the judiciary is a co-equal branch of government, and it is your obligation as a member of the executive branch to honor decisions made by the highest court of the land? Yes or no, Secretary?
We are abiding by all federal judges' orders, absolutely.
So yes, it's a co-equal branch of government. Okay, well, let me ask you a follow-up question to that. Do you agree that Congress is a co-equal branch of government, and it is your obligation as a member of the executive branch to honor legislation and appropriations duly authorized by Congress? Yes or no?
Yes, that's why I'm thrilled to work.
Well, let me ask you the follow-up question here, because I have a lot of them. Do you agree that Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse? Yes or no?
Yes, it is a duty.
Do you believe that, let me ask you another follow-up, it's just yes or no. Do you believe you have the power to disregard congressional appropriations and unilaterally repurpose funds that have been duly appropriated by Congress? Yes or no?
Ma'am, we are not doing that.
So the answer to you is no. All right, well, it was a yes or no, Secretary. Let me continue. Interestingly, you said no. But since you've been Secretary, you have repeatedly disregarded the law. You have illegally impounded funds that Congress appropriated and that your branch of government must implement pursuant to the law. Yet you You've closed offices established in law, including the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, the Office of the Immigration Detention Ombudsman, the Office of the Citizenship and Immigration Services, and you've canceled contracts for programs authorized in law, including shelter and service programs and citizenship and integration grants. You've obstructed and roughed up members of this committee as they attempted to conduct congressional oversight, and then you vilified them. But my question is, if they were so bad, why were they allowed to go in after to conduct oversight? Let me just continue. You redirected funds to terrorize our communities. You created taxpayer-funded political propaganda campaigns to terrorize families and children who don't sleep at night because of the terror of those commercials that you are putting out there. You hold sick, disrespectful press conferences in my state where, let me be clear, you are not welcome. You corruptly used emergency authority to avoid procurement to make Trump's private prison donors richer by directing $45 billion for them to expand ICE detention centers. You defunded work to address real threats to the homeland, all while you pursued college newspaper editors, labor leaders, and even a Harvard scientist who failed to declare frog embryos at the airport. Clearly, we don't have time for all my questions, so I have 13 pages worth of questions that I will be submitting to the record that I expect you and the administration to answer. But here is my final question to you. When you took your oath, did you swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America? Yes or no?
Yes, I did.
So I find that laughable. You don't behave like someone who takes that oath seriously. And let me tell you why. We don't live in a dictatorship or a monarchy. Trump's will is not the guiding doctrine of this nation, and our country is not a playground for his or your twisted authoritarian fantasies. We are a democracy. We defend the Constitution and we affirm the rule of law. We respect the co-equal branches of government and we uphold our rights, even when we disagree. The foundation of our nation is based on a core set of constitutional rights upon which our prosperity, our pluralism, and our peace depend on it. You, however, have been leading this work for 116 days, and in that time, you have profiled and dehumanized our neighbors. You've betrayed our constitutional commitment to due process. You've deported United States citizens. You've undermined the courts. You've broken the law. You've engaged in corruption, and you've weaponized the immigration system to violate civil rights. As Senator Murphy perfectly stated, your department is out of control, but you're responsible. You have betrayed the sacred fundamentals of your oath. And I believe to my core that you are not fit to hold the office. And I again, to your face, demand your immediate resignation, and I put it and place it on the record for all of us to see. With that, Chairman, I yield back.
Generally yields. Mr. Gabarino is recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, thank you so much for being here today. I'm the chairman of the Subcommittee on Cybersecurity Infrastructure Protection, so I work with CISA a lot. I have a few quick questions for you. Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act of 2015 provides the modern basis for information sharing between the private sector and the federal government. My subcommittee tomorrow will be having a hearing on CISA, the renewal of CISA 2015, since it expires in September. I'm just wondering, do you support the reauthorization of CISA 2015 ahead of its expiration?
Yes, I do, sir. It's an incredibly important piece of legislation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Another hearing that we had this year, we dealt with the proposed CIRCIA rulemaking process, and it started under the Biden administration. We heard from industry; they were not happy the way it went. I'm not happy with the way. I'm sure a lot of people aren't happy the way it went, and I still remain concerned that the scope of the proposed rules has strayed from congressional's intent. One of the things that came up at our hearing was whether or not CISA would consider to provide an ex parte process so we could get more comments from industry and hopefully get this back on track instead of starting over from scratch because it has to be done. Is that something that the department would consider?
Yes, we would support that, sir. I think that more input from the private sector is important to make sure we're doing the appropriate actions.
I mean, information sharing and making sure that people are actually responding to incidents instead of talking to their attorneys, I think is very, very important. And we want to make sure that this is the response rule, not just one of many other rules that are out there. I sent a letter back on February 19th regarding workforce reductions. It was about CISA staff that was fired and their responsibilities and titles. I've not yet received a response, and given the growing number of the growing cybersecurity threat landscape and the administration's stated interest, which they have in addressing these threats, I'm concerned that reducing CISA's staff will not help CISA accomplish the mission of protecting cybersecurity, providing cybersecurity to the people that need it or helping. The letter asks for the number of staff, the responsibilities of those staff, and the impacts on CISA's ability to fulfill its mission. I know you can't provide that answer now, but can I get a commitment to get that response to that letter sometime soon?
Absolutely.
I appreciate that as well. And I know we're here about the budget, so I do want to ask some questions. In the administration's skinny budget request, it's seeking a $491 million reduction for CISA. I'm all on board with getting rid of disinformation and misinformation, and I was supportive of that cut, but that was in fiscal year 2023, that was only $20 million. Only $20 million of its budget went, so getting rid of that, that still leaves about $471 million of cuts. That's which is about a 17% cut to its total budget. Why such a large cut? And in addition to that, there was also, I believe, a program request moving $130 million around. What programs are going to be affected with that request?
Well, Congressman, the focus within CISA needs to be on ensuring that it's fulfilling why it was created. It was created to support critical infrastructure and to make sure that we're out there addressing the cybersecurity concerns that we have. The reductions that you see are in the areas where it got off mission, where it was involved in mis, dis, and malinformation, and also the censorship activities. That's where the reflection is, but the cybersecurity side of CISA is strengthened and emboldened under President Trump's leadership and will be into the future, and making sure that we're giving them the tools that they need to create new partnerships. Those plans to partner with private industries will make us much more efficient and accountable to taxpayers, while making sure that we actually have answers to some of the threats that we have in front of us. That's the thing that has alarmed me the most about CISA is the lack of information that they have, the lack of solutions that they have, and how they protect our critical infrastructure. And when you look at Volt Typhoon, it wasn't just that we're vulnerable. It's that the Chinese have proven, PRC has proven with bad actors, that they can shut down our water plants, our electrical grid, that they have the ability to do that. And if we think something in the past, like a pandemic or a crisis like that was scary, wait until people's electricity is gone or their water system shuts down. And so that is one of the reasons why CISA needs to be laser focused on truly what its mission is.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I'm out of time, but I also just want to say, I hope we can work together on this, and I'm very excited for Mr. Planke's nomination. I think he's going to do a great job, and hopefully they can confirm him sometime soon. But I'd like to talk to you more about the budget when we have a chance.
Whose time has expired? Chair recognizes.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter for the record an article from the Oversight Project that quotes the Supreme Court case Gojek versus the United States that talks about Congress's power of oversight, stating that no committee of either the House or Senate and no senator and no representative is free on its or his or her own to conduct investigations unless authorized. And that was a Supreme Court case. I'd also ask you...
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you. I also ask unanimous consent to enter for the record that the ICE facility that Democrats and one of our own members here stormed, according to the Secretary, Assistant Secretary of Homeland, categorized these detainees in ICE as murderers, terrorists, child rapists, and MS-13 gang members.
Without objection,
Mr. Chairman,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I have unanimous
Mr. Goldman is recognized.
I would like to introduce an article just published by Bloomberg Government in which the acting director of Immigrations and Customs Enforcement acknowledges that any member of Congress has the right to show up at any detention facility with or without appointments, and that he will follow that law.
Without objection. So ordered.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I have unanimous consent also.
Yeah, gentleman's recognized.
Thank you. I just want to also enter for the record Section 527A of the Department of Homeland Security Appropriations Act of 2024, that it says explicitly that members of Congress have the right to access ICE detention facilities with no prior notice at any time. If I can-
Without objection.
Thank you.
So ordered. Ms. McIver is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member. A lot has been said, and I expect a lot more will be said about the department's interaction with members of this body when it comes to oversight. But this is not about me. Madam Secretary, it's not every day we have a cabinet member before this committee. As you know, the members of this committee have constitutional oversight responsibility for your department, and there are many things regarding this administration's Homeland Security policies that require our immediate attention. That is the work I am here to do today and every day. Secretary, this committee and the American people deserve answers for the actions of the Department of Homeland Security under this administration and the policies that have been put into place. The department has overseen a regime of cruelty, chaos, and deep disregard for human dignity, all under the pretense of security. The department is being mismanaged, and its policies undermine our nation's values. This does not make us safer, the exact opposite, exactly. Secretary, we need answers about your department's union busting at TSA, deporting U.S. citizens, terminating the legal status of international students for no apparent reason, and disregarding the rule of law. None of these issues at your department exist in a vacuum. In fact, they are all fundamentally connected to the administration's overarching cruelty. We want to hear from you because we are hoping you can make it make sense for us. Because with all due respect, we are all trying to understand why in the world this is taking place. In my district and around this nation, countless international students had their visas revoked without due process, without warning, and without any regard for how this would devastate their lives. These are students who came here to learn, to build their futures, and join our workforce, only to have the rug pulled out from under them by this department's actions. How can we expect international students to trust our institutions and contribute to our economy when we treat them like they've done something wrong just because they are here? Are we no longer the home of the American dream? I also want you to understand DHS's impact on our entire workforce. I proudly represent over 1,000 dedicated TSA workers who had the right to unionize. But that right has been stripped away by your department. This is an attack on the people who safeguard our skies and whose dedication we rely on now more than ever. And the destruction doesn't stop there. I represent communities that live in constant fear each and every day. Families too terrified to step outside and send their kids to school, go grocery shopping, or take a trip to the doctor because of the harassment of ICE and Homeland Security. This isn't public safety, it's state-sponsored fear. I understand that this administration believes that it is its business to scare people into submission and act alone with no regard for the law to decide who is worthy to live in this country or not. However, it is this committee's business to make sure your department is held accountable and to get the American people the answers they've been looking for. So, with that, Madam Secretary, I have a few yes or no questions. Do you agree that revoking student visas without notice can cause fear and confusion among international students? Yes or no?
Congressman, I do not.
Congresswoman, but yes or no?
Congresswoman, I do not decide legal status or visa programs. For
I'll take that as a yes. Do you support restoring full collective bargaining rights for TSA employees? Yes or no?
Ma'am, currently today, TSA does not have the
Yes or
ability
no?
to unionize.
Okay, take that as a no. Do you believe that TSA workers should make a livable wage? Yes or no?
Yes, TSA workers are critically important to
Thank
our
you for that.
security systems, for our
Are you aware that recent student visa revocations occur without due process or proper notification?
Ma'am, I don't make a determination of status.
Yes or
The
no?
Department of State does
I'm guessing
that.
you don't know? Okay. Do you believe that TSA workers have the right to better workplace conditions?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
TSA
great. Thank you for
workers are
that.
incredibly
Do you
important
believe
to
that students should have an opportunity to appeal before their visas are revoked? Yes or no?
all processes are followed and that are set out as tools?
I'm guessing
and
it's a no. Okay,
processes
one
in
more
this
last question in 9 seconds. Do you believe that revoking collective bargaining rights for TSA workers affects their morale and job performance? Yes or no?
I believe TSA is critically important.
Okay,
in the
I'll take
future
that
and
as,
they have
maybe
been-
you don't know, maybe it's yes or no.
Gentlelady's time is
That I-
expired. I now
that I
recognize Mr. Gonzalez for 5 minutes of his questioning.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for doing a wonderful job. And it's been a breath of fresh air. A lot of people like to talk about the border. I represent a large part of the border. The places that are on TV are the places that you have visited, the places that I represent, like Del Rio, like Eagle Pass, like El Paso, other places. And y'all have done a fantastic job. I want to start with BORTAC. BORTAC has been, when we talk about how do we go out and apprehend these hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of convicted criminal illegal aliens that are a threat to all our communities, BORTAC is always the answer. I recently met with them. They're based out of Fort Bliss. They're in El Paso. They're always the ones that go out and are doing the heavy lifting. If I'd love to put this on your radar. I know you're making a lot of budgetary decisions, and the administration is. That facility is way, way outdated. For the work that they do, they need a new facility. And I know it's on Fort Bliss. If there's a way that we can work either through this committee or through the Appropriations Committee to find a way to give them the proper housing, just the proper headquarters that they need, I think this would be very critical in going out there. I'd love to hear your thoughts on BORTAC.
Yeah, I spent some time with them as well down at Fort Bliss, and they do incredible work, and they don't just operate within their own agency, but also partner with other law enforcement agencies and meet needs around the country at a moment's notice. So their skill set is unique. Their specialty training is needed, and in fact, it needs to be expanded. We could use more teams like they have and give them more opportunities to continue to serve, because the skill set they bring to the table keeps people safer. And helps us meet the challenges with what we need to protect our officers out in the field and to make sure citizens are protected as well. So we'll certainly look at their facilities and see what we can do to strengthen the resources that they have.
Thank you for that. They're just doing incredible work. Once again, every time there's a problem solved, BORTAC has a role to play, whether it's, on the back, the intelligence piece to it, helping with some of these task forces, or actually going out and apprehending folks. On that note, Uvalde is in my district. We had, a couple years ago, we had one of the worst school shootings in history, certainly in Texas's history. And, it was BORTAC that neutralized that shooter. And so I want to talk about school safety a little bit. You've got children, you've got grandchildren, I've got children. That's one thing that I think can bring us all together, is just the safety of our children. And one area that I think goes unlooked is the Secret Service's role. As I've dived into school safety, Secret Service is at the heart of a lot of these solutions. And nobody thinks it in that manner. I'd love to get your thoughts. When it comes to school safety, what role do you think the Secret Service is currently playing, or can it play in helping solve some of these problems?
Well, right now, Secret Service is underutilized, and they also are under-resourced. If you look through our reconciliation request and also fiscal year 26 budget request, there's additional dollars that are needed to really give Secret Service the tools, the training, and the resources that they need to meet every single situation that they're involved in right now. Obviously, they have the protectee units and agents that are out there on the ground protecting individuals, and the most powerful in the world, but also they have an investigative side that is a skill set that many other agencies like to tap into and ask them for insight into. So working to protect our kids are our future. They really are what America is going to be and is today for many, many years. So it's incredibly important that we use that skill set to give advice, wisdom, but also training to those individuals that secure our schools. You know, the Department of Education has a partnership with us in how we train school security officers, but also how we go out and support local law enforcement to respond to situations like you experienced in your home district. It's a tragedy that we can be better equipped for and prepared for in the future, and making sure that we're taking care of people ahead of time.
That's it.
And addressing the concerns and the flags that happen before we end up in a situation like you experienced.
Yeah, I appreciate that response, and I'm really trying to get ahead of a problem, not wait for the problem to occur and then blame somebody else for why the problem was there. Like, let's just make sure our kids are safe as we harden schools, as we look for ideas to strengthen family units and do those different things. Once again, the Secret Service constantly continues to come up, so I look forward to working with you on that and other.
One thing I would say is in the last several months, Secret Service recruitment has been up over 200%.
Amazing.
And under President Trump and the recruitment efforts that we've had for that agency, overwhelmingly people want to be a part of their mission in the future.
You know, part of my schools, and I know I have just a little time, so part of my district, you know, the Guardian program where teachers are armed is what works for that community. Other communities, they don't want to have their teachers armed. That, in my eyes, that's something for them to decide. But as far as a federal government response, I think the Secret Service can add to whatever local ideas they have. So I look forward to working with you on strengthening that and others. Thank you again, and I yield back, Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Johnson for 5 minutes. Questions?
Thank you so much, Mr.
Texas to
Chairman.
Texas.
And thank you, Madam Secretary, for appearing before our committee today. I want to address several issues. I'm going to try not to repeat a lot of issues that have been addressed, but I do have some substantial concerns over how ICE agents present themselves to the public. Oftentimes, we've seen many videos out there where they're masked and not properly identified. I have a lot of real personal concern about that. I just put myself in the situation of that woman from Tufts, for example. You're just walking down the street, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 3 masked men, not properly identified, attack you and try to take you away. I find that to be reprehensible and not the values of this country. What steps are you taking to make sure that your ICE agents are not masked and properly identified when they approach someone?
Well, ICE agents always identify themselves to individuals that they're encountering or that they're working with. What I would say, as far as if they are wearing something over their faces, it's oftentimes because that agent has been involved in undercover operations or needs to be able to continue the investigative work that they do on a day-to-day basis.
But don't you think, Madam Secretary, that people have a right to see whoever's trying to apprehend them? I think it's creating this unrealistic vigilante system. And are you aware that your materials, ICE agents, jackets and the sorts, are available on Etsy for 20 bucks? Anybody can do that, throw a mask on, and run around and terrorizing people of color without any regard for the law, without any regard, because your agency does not have proper protocols to make sure their agents are clearly identified and marked when they're executing their jobs.
Our agents do identify themselves. They verbally do that, and then also by the clothing that they're wearing. And if they do have something that is covering some of their facial features, it's for their investigative work or their undercover work that they do as a part of their job duties as well. What I would say is that it is important that we follow the procedures and protocols for every encounter that we have, and they have done that in every situation to the best of my knowledge.
Well, I would suggest that your protocols need to be revised, because I don't think it's reasonable for masked men to be apprehending people on the streets. I think that instills a lot of fear. It doesn't instill security in the process. And in states like Texas, that is open carry, when any jackadoo can be walking around with a gun, I think some tragic circumstances are at bay. I'd like to switch gears to due process. I have a lot of concerns about the lack of due process that your agency has been affording people in this country. In Texas, for example, you had rounded up 171 individuals, were preparing to deport them, and it wasn't until the Supreme Court issued an opinion that that was unconstitutional and that their due process rights were being violated did your agency actually stop and adhere to the Supreme Court's opinion. My question to you is, has those efforts ceased in your agency? Are you going to cease trying to deport people without access to due process in the courts of law in compliance with the United States Supreme Court?
Well, Congresswoman, we are following due process and using it as to how Congress has laid out to us in statute, and we are complying with all federal judges' orders as well.
Well, you weren't complying at that time. It took the United States Supreme Court to order you to comply, so you hadn't proactively complied on your own. You were intending to wrongfully deport people without access to a court hearing, without access to the rule of law, and that is why it was necessary for the United States Supreme Court,
Due process does not guarantee a hearing.
who issued an opinion ordering you and your agency to comply with the due process rights of the people in this country. That's what separates, that's what makes our country great, is we do have access to due process. And so my comment to you is I'm hoping as you move forward, because initially as you were proceeding through these deportation processes, you were not affording people due process, and the Supreme Court has now ordered you to do so. So I am assuming by your testimony that you do intend to comply with the Supreme Court's order moving forward, and we're not going to have any more instances of wrongful deportation without proper access to due process. Is that correct?
We are following federal judges' orders, and we are complying with due process procedures as they are laid out, as Congress has given us those tools to do that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. I have one other question about FEMA. I'm very concerned about the destruction of FEMA. You know, Texas is a state that has a lot of hurricanes, tornadoes, and natural disasters. We rely upon FEMA extensively, and I'm very worried about that. And when you are governor, though, you actually utilized FEMA for your own state. So you did recognize at the time when you were serving as a governor that FEMA played an important role in natural disasters within South Dakota. Is that correct?
Yes, we had 12 FEMA-related disasters during the 6 years I served as governor of the state of South Dakota.
But I just find it, I'm running out of time, but I just find it ironic.
I now recognize Mr. Pfluger, the gentleman from Texas, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, thank you for being here. What a difference an election makes, what a difference a Congress makes, what a difference having you here instead of asking thousands of questions and getting no answers. And I'll start with the first question that I left off with and I know that may be funny to my colleagues, but it's not funny to me because of the known and suspected terrorists, the KSTs that came into this country. And I'll basically lead off with the last question that I asked your predecessor, which was the policy of the Department of Homeland Security and this administration when it comes to KSTs. And talk to us about the successes that we've had and kind of where we stand, because they left us with a real mess with 40 plus people that were in this country. And, you know, I'd like to hear what your department has done and tell us kind of the path forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Congressman. The previous administration let a lot of dangerous individuals into this country and get a foothold, and then not only just allowing them to perpetuate terrorist activities in our country, but also recruit new members and to build out their systems and to gain access to our infrastructure. So I'm very proud of the fact that President Trump has aggressively enforced the law. Let us use the tools that are afforded to us under the Department of Homeland Security to address these threats, bring them to justice and face consequences, and to get them out of our country. So he has removed over 250 known terrorists, suspected terrorists on the watch list, thousands and thousands of individuals that were affiliated with them, but also individuals that committed crimes that are members of MS-13, Tren de Aragua, but also cartels and their members and affiliates in this country. So overwhelmingly, the safety of our communities is in a much better spot than it was just 6 short months ago. And even the message that President Trump has been bold enough to send around the world. He specifically told me, Kristi, if you're given this job, I want you to tell the world that America has new leadership, that we are enforcing our laws now, and that Americans get to be prioritized and their safety comes first. And if you want to break our laws and come to this country, don't even try it. And that has sent an overwhelming message to the world that they're adhering to. That's one of the reasons you see less encounters at the border, is because people are staying home in their home countries because now they know we follow our laws. The Mexican president and her team told me that they believe they've stopped over 600,000 people in Mexico before they even reached our border because they got the message they could no longer cross into the United States. So we don't even know the hundreds of thousands of people that simply were in the process and turned around because President Trump has been very vocal at sending the message to the world, don't come here if you want to break our laws and victimize our people.
Well, the deterrent value of the policy, just enforcing the laws, has certainly been noticeable. I represent a district that includes part of your air and marine operations that flies drones out of San Angelo, Texas, and flies into the Gulf of Mexico, but also along the border. One of the issues that we faced in the previous administration was this huge number of known gotaways. Talk to us about the coordination with the state and local level. I also represent a piece of Fort Cavazos, and we have military personnel who have a designated area along the border. How is that process working for deterrence, but also to ensure there are no gotaways like we had?
Well, there are known gotaways, and then there's probably hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people that we don't necessarily know how many of them are in this country. That because we had Border Patrol and assets and Coast Guard and ICE agents diverted into processing paperwork and facilitating illegal entry into our country, they weren't doing their security operations. They weren't allowed to do their jobs. People have talked about me being out on the front lines with all of our components and agencies. I'll tell you why I'm there. The reason I'm walking alongside them is because I want to understand their jobs, where they don't have the equipment that they need, what authorizations and authorities they need to do their jobs. And overwhelmingly, they appreciate the fact that they finally have a secretary that shows up to walk alongside them, one that rides with them and doesn't ride over them and doesn't listen to them and has never been out in the field. They want me to be with them, and they're proud of the fact that I don't mind representing them and their agency to the rest of the world, saying I'm proud of the work that they do. We have a lot of gotaways. We also have some we don't even know that are in this country yet, and that's probably what keeps me up at night the most, is the fact that we don't really know the dangerous individuals that may be in this country, that we have to get out before something happens that jeopardizes our national security.
Secretary, thank you for being here and for your service. Our country is safer having you at the helm. And Mr. Chairman, yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Hernandez for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, hi. I represent Puerto Rico in Congress, and although we may disagree as to how, I do agree that disaster response in this country needs to be reimagined and made more effective. And I sincerely look forward to and hope to be a constructive partner in that respect. You know, nearly 8 years after Hurricane Maria struck the island, we have around $27 billion that have been obligated for Puerto Rico, yet only $4.4 billion have been dispersed. In the interest of time, I appreciate brief answers because there's a lot of anxiety in the island as to the future of these funds. Can you assure the people of Puerto Rico that these obligated funds are safe, regardless of any FEMA restructuring?
That is the biggest concern that we have within FEMA right now, is outstanding claims. And the worst thing the federal government can do is to say that there is a claim here, it's valid, that we are committed to fulfilling that responsibility.
I'm sorry, in the interest of time, could you say yes or no?
So those claims are something my team is going through right now and evaluating, and President Trump is committed.
I will assume
following
that the
through
answer is no, and I'll proceed to the next question, and I hope that we can work to make sure that those funds get to the people. Is it your department's view that the Puerto Rico government has done everything in its power to expedite the reconstruction process?
Oh, I believe that Puerto Rico has been working hard to reconstruct and to put itself back together, and partnering with the federal government as well.
So is the obstacle in the disbursements FEMA's fault?
The what?
Is the obstacle in these disbursements FEMA's responsibility?
I don't have the knowledge to know specifically where all the problems are with the response in Puerto Rico, although I do know that FEMA has not fulfilled the obligations it previously promised to the
Thank
island.
You. I'm going to shift to immigration in the interest of time. So you served as governor of South Dakota. Would you advise governors to give public assurances that federal immigration enforcement will not take place in their state?
Would I advise to governors that they not?
That they give public assurances that immigration enforcement will not occur in their states?
No, I prefer that governors partner with us to make their states safer. I believe that the relationships that we have on the ground in many states is absolutely critical to making sure.
So the answer is no. You would not advise them to tell their constituents, no, there will not be any enforcement in this state. Would you have publicly told immigrants, as governor in your state, not to worry about deportations because your state wasn't a border state like Texas or California?
I felt as though my state was a border state because we were every day impacted by the drug trafficking and the human trafficking that was coming over the border and had put a foothold in the state of South Dakota. Every state was dramatically impacted.
Okay, so you would not have told immigrants in your state, don't worry about deportation. You would not have said that.
The laws need to apply equally to everybody. That's what is so discouraging about the previous administration is they picked winners
Okay,
and losers.
so
They
that's
decided
that
who
the
it
question has
applied
been
to
answered. That's
and
fine.
who it didn't.
You
That
would
doesn't
not
happen
you
anymore.
would not say that. You
Now
would
the
not
law-
you
now
would
the
tell your
laws-
constituents immigration laws will be enforced in this state whether or not we are a border state like California or Texas.
Laws will be enforced, absolutely.
In January, the governor of Puerto Rico made an opposite claim. She told immigrants not to worry about deportations because we're not Texas or California. Days later, ICE conducted enforcement operations in immigrant neighborhoods in San Juan. Was that a responsible thing to say?
I didn't hear her say that and haven't heard this before, but I believe that the partnerships we have with governors is extremely powerful in keeping their communities safe.
That's a no answer. Was she aware, was she briefed by DHS about the immigrant raids that would happen in the ensuing days?
I have no knowledge to that situation. What I will tell you is that every governor that I know of feels the responsibility of protecting their state, and they should be making the best decisions to secure their communities and their families that live there.
And that includes telling people in their states or jurisdictions, the administration's policy is that there will be raids to detain people who were undocumented in their jurisdictions, not to tell them, don't worry, this will not happen here.
I am not certain as to the situation you're speaking to. I'll get more information so that I can respond to you appropriately.
But
I'm not certain.
hypothetically,
I'm not certain
as
what
governor, would you have told the people of your state, the laws will be enforced here as in any other state?
What I would tell my people of South Dakota is that my job is to work for them and to represent them and to be their leader and protect their best interests. That includes making sure that citizens of South Dakota are my #1 priority every day.
I understand that, and I thank you for your time. And like I said at the beginning of my turn, I do look forward to working constructively on ways to reimagine FEMA and disaster response and to make sure that those funds, which today you have told us are not guaranteed for the people of Puerto Rico, are guaranteed and delivered on time. Thank you.
Gentleman's time is expired. I now recognize Mr. Luttrell for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, how are you today? I'd like to talk about the health and wellness of our operators, our DHS and immigration, everyone that's underneath your portfolio. I think the one thing that's often lost is that, you have military veterans in the room with you, and our role and responsibility was to put on a uniform in our body armor, and we deployed globally to fight terrorism. And we had to leave the country to do that. And the men and women under DHS, they put on their uniforms every day and deploy right out their front door. And that's challenging. That is a unforgivable, kind of space. And my focus in the veteran community and active duty service, as well as your department, is the health and wellness of our operators currently and after they leave the career. Can you shed some light on it? And to make another point, my lovely colleague from Texas was concerned about they cover their faces up and the kits that they wear, and I can understand that's aggressive. That's a posturing, and it's not. We don't get in gunfights every day, but the day that happens, you will appreciate the fact that you're wearing that uniform. And I'll also add, it's just, if you're presented with somebody that's got their face covered, that can be scary. I got it. But when you're dealing with terrorist organizations that are internal and on our borders, it's not the operator that they're going to go after. They'll take a picture of that face and go after the families. So it's anonymity for the operators too, which needs to be said because it's important to protect the men and women that work under your department. So if you will, please, can you kind of shed some light on me where we currently are now that you're the secretary for our health and wellness, cognitively and physically, and where we're going, please?
Well, it is a concern for me, especially since we've seen an escalation in violence against our law enforcement officers, and specifically those even within the Department of Homeland Security. The aggression that they face every single day as a part of their job duties is something that we have to make sure that we recognize and that we have the tools to help them and their family be successful. So Going forward and making sure that we're providing health care, but also mental health care is a priority of the department and this administration, recognizing that the previous administration let a lot of dangerous individuals, terrorists, and gang members and known cartel members into this country. And now, and they've recruited new members, and they've recruited homegrown terrorists that are citizens of the United States that are members of TDA now and MS-13 that present new and unique challenges. That is something that we have made a priority to make sure that we're equipping them, to prepare them for situations they're going to face with training and giving them the right equipment to protect themselves, but also when they step back from that line of duty, how we can help them be whole and go back and live a successful life with their family. What I would say is that it's difficult in areas of this country that were neglected for too long, especially in our Coast Guard. They're often very remote and isolated. They don't have access to specialty care, to mental health care, and it's my commitment to all of our departments and components in the Coast Guard that I get them that kind of care where they're located, because sometimes where they're stationed is not an area where that is available to them readily.
Yes, ma'am. And my office, and myself included, look forward to working with you and your team on this. I'd hate for that to be lost in translation as hard as Coast Guard, Coast Guard, Secret Service, our agents, as hard as they work, it's not, and I can't say I disagree, but it's just something that's happening. We don't do baseline assessments on these operators, which we should absolutely do. We should track the health and wellness from start to finish. And then when we hand them off back to their families, hey, we have the in comfort knowing that they're going to be fine once they move on to the next chapter of their life. So I look forward to further conversations with you and your team. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Kennedy from New York for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, thank you for your time before this committee. Today is a solemn day for my community in Buffalo, New York. 3 years ago, on May 14th, 2022, a gunman, motivated by racism and hatred, drove 2.5 hours from his home to the east side of Buffalo to carry out an act of domestic terrorism. Equipped with enhanced body armor, a tactical helmet, and a semi-automatic rifle, the gunman opened fire at a local grocery store in a predominantly black community. In just 123 seconds, he took 10 innocent souls that day, severely injured 3, and traumatized countless other individuals. Because of this act of domestic terrorism, radicalized and indoctrinated online, and carried out in the name of white supremacy, families in my community will never be whole again. Buffalo now joins a growing list of communities impacted by mass shootings carried out by lone wolf, homegrown, domestically radicalized, disturbed individuals. Secretary Noem, in your written testimony today, there's not one mention of this kind of threat to the homeland. You refer to foreign terrorist organizations. You refer to aliens who are affiliated with foreign terrorism. You refer to arrests of suspected gang members. Not once do you mention the term domestic terrorism, domestic terrorist, or lone wolf. There's a gaping hole in your testimony today. You fail to reassure this committee or the American people that you'll protect the homeland from bad actors, radicalized right here in the U.S., like the gunman who opened fire on my community 3 years ago today. There's been a systematic, intentional effort by your department and this administration since January 20th to ignore the very real threat posed by domestic terrorism. This is a blatant negligence made abundantly clear by the administration's budget and by President Trump's broader actions to defund the Department of Homeland Security initiatives that track and prevent domestic terrorism. The Trump administration's budget proposal for the Department of Homeland Security completely eliminates the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program, a critical DHS program dedicated to helping local communities, including law enforcement, to develop and strengthen efforts to counter attacks of targeted violence and terrorism, just like the racist Buffalo attack. This exact grant program awarded nearly $1 million in the aftermath of the 514 shooting in Western New York to help close research gaps about the radicalization of domestic terrorists, develop violence prevention modules, and improve bystander intervention. This program was also used to harden safety and prevention efforts in other communities that experienced targeted domestic terrorism, including a school shooting in Oakland County, Michigan, and a pattern of other domestic terrorist incidents. The budget proposal you're defending today justifies the elimination of this funding by arguing it was, quote, weaponized to target Americans exercising their First Amendment rights, end quote. If the suggestion that an act of domestic terrorism, which took the lives of 10 innocent people and forever changed my community, qualifies as protected First Amendment speech, then explain that to the families of the victims who were killed that day. Under this administration, we have a Department of Homeland Security that is making excuses for domestic terrorists under the guise of free speech and insulting communities like mine, especially on a day like today, as we mark the anniversary of unimaginable violence and loss. We can do better, and we must do better. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Strong, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, thank you for aiding President Trump in securing our border after years of negligence and mismanagement. No new laws were needed. New leadership was the only piece of the puzzle missing. I'd also like to thank the hardworking men and women of DHS for their tireless dedication to safeguarding our nation. Last week, I spoke to the FBI Director Patel about a recent visit he had to Huntsville, Alabama, and Redstone Arsenal. We discussed the cost-effective location, distinct partnership opportunities, high quality of life for personnel, the remarkable talent pool, and available room to grow. As you may know, I'm proud to host HSI XCOM South and the National Academy for Advanced Training and Leadership in my district, along with many companies and organizations that support DHS. I'd like to invite you to come see for yourself the phenomenal work occurring in North Alabama. Secretary Noem, I'm curious, are there plans to move DHS personnel and programs out of the Beltway and closer to the citizens they serve?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Currently, there aren't plans to move agencies or components outside of their offices, although we do believe that we need to be accountable to taxpayers and are evaluating every single mission set that each agency is tasked with and the individuals, how they are fulfilling it. So that is areas where you'll see reflected in our reconciliation ask and in our fiscal year 26 budget request that reflects where those needs are, but also our ability to reprogram dollars that where the department got off mission and was perpetuating activities that were not a part of Homeland Security's reason for why it was created.
Thank you. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention my role as chairman of the Emergency Management and Technology Subcommittee, and I want to thank you for meeting with us in New Orleans. You made your schedule available to meet that committee right after you were confirmed, and we really appreciate that. As you can imagine, I have an interest in the work of FEMA Review Council and was pleased to see the announcement of 13 new members. Secretary Noem, the President's executive order said the council would have up to 20 members. Will additional members be added, and how are you coordinating with the White House on the council?
Yes, absolutely. There is the potential for new members to be added, and that is a current evaluation that's ongoing with me and my team and the White House as well. So if you have recommendations, we certainly would continue to receive those.
Thank you. We're excited about those recommendations. What do you anticipate the priorities of the council will be, and how can we support that work?
Well, the priorities of the council is to evaluate FEMA as it stands today and how it can better be reformed and replaced to respond to people's needs in a time of crisis. What we can do to strengthen states, to give them more tools and resources to take care of their people and empower them to make decisions in a critical response period. Many times you've seen over the years where the federal government has not shown up when they were expected to, and then even after a crisis was over, had committed to being there to help people restructure and to rebuild and never followed through on it. We still have claims outstanding in FEMA from Hurricane Katrina, wildfire claims from out west that are 10 years old, where people said, We have this claim, this lost. FEMA committed to pay it and still has not followed through on that. We saw political targeting that happened in North Carolina, where individuals within FEMA decided who could get help and who didn't get help. So that needs to end, and this needs some integrity to it, and making sure the federal government's there for support, but the states are empowered to do the emergency response is very important to President Trump.
That support was determined based on the political sign they had in the front yards of their home.
That is correct.
And that's totally unacceptable. Switching gears, I'd also like to highlight the great work of CISA to protect our infrastructure and mass gathering events. Their training and exercises help states and localities respond quickly and effectively to evolving threats. In Huntsville, Alabama, collaboration among the FBI, ATF, CISA Office for Bombing Prevention represents a national hub of expertise focused on countering bomb threats and the use of explosives by adversaries. Secretary Noem, can you speak to how CISA is working with interagency partners to secure infrastructure, particularly ahead of the World Cup and Olympics?
Yeah, CISA is the federal cybersecurity agency. It is the priority point for all agencies to interact with and their connections to state and local governments. And many times CISA got siloed, and our CIA, FBI, intelligence agencies were siloed and not sharing information. So we're building out a cooperation that has never existed before, and where we're bringing them to the table, sharing information that we may have as far as vulnerabilities, but also in how we can partner with private industry. The fact of the matter is that's a resource that was neglected for much too long. And so bringing private industry to the table to tell us and help us go out there and find those bad actors. Oftentimes they know, but they don't have a protection of letting us know without some kind of liability that they expose themselves to. So we're committed to building those kinds of partnerships so that they can flag threats to us without worried about retribution from those bad actors into their own companies.
Secretary Noem, it's an honor to have you before us today. We'll see you in Alabama soon. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New Jersey, Ms. Poe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, good afternoon. I wish we could have heard from you before ramming through a $70 billion reconciliation bill. But nevertheless, I'm really happy that, and glad that we have a chance to speak with you today. Like many of my colleagues, I am deeply concerned that your department is blatantly ignoring our laws. The law is very, very clear. Members of Congress can show up unannounced to facilities, and ICE must accommodate a tour of their detention centers. The fact that your spokesperson suggested arresting members of Congress who were given a tour of the facility is disturbing and certainly dangerous. We will not accept threats or intimidation by anyone at your department or across the administration for exercising our constitutional oversight authority. Now, let me just refer now to my questions. The Trump administration's funding freeze has created chaos and unpredictability for state and local governments to respond to threats. Reportedly, $100 billion has been canceled or is being unlawfully withheld. You stated today that we are a nation of laws, yet you are actually violating the law. In our recent markup, I offered an amendment to prohibit DHS from delaying or withholding FEMA grant funding. Unfortunately, it was rejected by my GOP colleagues. As my district ramps up for the World Cup, our first responders and municipalities require resources today. By delaying and withholding grants like the Homeland Security Grant Program, you do not just create uncertainty, you undermine the ability of state and local governments to begin security planning for one of the world's largest sporting events. Right now, you are a month behind issuing guidance on this critical funding. Similarly, guidance has not been issued for the nonprofit Grant Security Program, which protects synagogues, churches, and mosques from threats. These delays harm our national security. Madam Secretary, when does your department plan for the Homeland Security Grant Program and the nonprofit security grant program funding to be made available?
Congresswoman, every grant under the Department of Homeland Security is being evaluated to make sure that it's following statute as required by Congress as to how it should be allocated and obligated to local states and communities. So as many of those grants were paused and evaluated, you've seen that they've been continued and put out, but if they were misappropriated into things that were off of the guidance of how the grant should be utilized, then it was changed. But these grants that have been obligated and should go forward have been continued.
Thank you, thank you. Let me just real quickly, because I know our time is it's nearing to a close. As you know, New Jersey is one of 11 American citizens that will, cities, that will host the FIFA World Cup matches next year. The final match will be held in my district in New Jersey. There will be tens of thousands of spectators at the final match and hundreds of thousands more attending Fan Fest throughout the northern New Jersey area. The World Cup is a time of international competition and celebration, but I worry about the chilling effect of the Trump administration's anti-immigrant rhetoric and America's ability to serve as a welcoming host. To add, the Trump administration is looking to reinstate and expand a travel ban targeting 43 countries for restrictions on entering the United States. Can you please tell us how you will ensure that fans traveling legally to the United States are not targeted for immigration raids?
We are already working as an administration with the teams from all the countries that will come and be competing and their fans as well to process their paperwork and to help facilitate their travel to the United States. And as you've seen, the president has formulated a task force that will focus on holding this unprecedented event and doing it in the safest manner possible while adding hospitality to it and helping people enjoy the matches and enjoy interacting with each other. And as you know, over 10 million people will attend the matches over that month-long period of time. Over 22 million people will interact through activities. You'd mentioned Fan Fest, and that is something that the Department of Homeland Security is tasked with. It's our responsibility to partner with local communities and cities that are the hosts, and we'll be working with your city as well to ensure that we're prepared for it, that we have the needs met, and that we are doing all that we can to secure each location.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you in that regard. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Brukeen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Secretary, it is so nice to see chaos and confusion and lawlessness being replaced by law and order. Thankful to you serving on this administration and implementing common sense. I don't know today that it was discussed, and if it has been, I missed it. The Colombian entity that was picked up in the last several days in Houston, convicted of murder that came across the border during the Biden administration, 21-year murder conviction sentence, and the very same ICE agents that were shoved and yelled and cursed at are the same ICE agents that are responsible for detaining and picking up this individual that was in the streets of Texas. You said earlier today in your testimony, discussing what happened in the last several days with colleagues even on this committee on the Democrat side, trying to go to a detention center. This is the same type of place, Delaney Hall, where you would find murderers and rapists, and like this Colombian entity, convicted of murder, and is now in your custody. It's just madness that lawlessness is being perpetrated by even members of Congress. I want to switch gears. FEMA. There is great excitement, even as I'm talking to officials in Oklahoma who would love the opportunity to be able to make sure that the decisions for efficient use of taxpayer monies are implemented on the state level, knowing that the dollars will go farther, and knowing that you all, as you're discussing block granting, can you elaborate on current conditions, current status, There are people all over the country, even, there's a Democrat member that is former emergency management. He talks about the efficiencies that can be picked up on the state level. Can you talk about where you all are at, where we're headed on FEMA reform that can make the taxpayer dollar go farther?
Yeah, we've got some incredible work ahead of us to do on FEMA and our response as a federal government and how we support states in this. And there's certainly a lot of people weighing in. We've got members of Congress on the House and the Senate side that have bills and legislation that they want to propose, but also I think it's important to have governors at the table because they're the ones who lead the response many times and know where the downfalls are. In many cases, there's hardworking FEMA employees that do their very best to deliver for those individuals in those communities. But what's happened in the past is that even under the previous administration, some of those FEMA employees were given the opportunity to not respond to a disaster if they didn't want to or if it wasn't convenient. And so recognizing the importance of this agency and prioritizing it and making sure it's there to support the local response is incredibly important to the success for those families that get impacted by unprecedented events. So we're taking input. This review council is going to be continuing to give insight to the White House as well, and then the president certainly has ideas. He's traveled and been there for people on their worst days, and he's heard their stories of how they thought FEMA would be there, FEMA promised they would be there, and then they never showed up. They had a claim that they couldn't do the paperwork themselves. They had to get people to help them fill out this complicated paperwork process, and then the claim was never paid, or there was some problem, and they had to appeal, and appealing was normal, and that just doesn't serve people.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that it's a predictable process that's timely, and the best way to do that is to empower the local supporters.
Well, I've told this story often. Given I've got a minute, I'll relay it to you. I'll never forget in 2012 in Oklahoma, a friend of mine were helping do some cleanup work on machinery. I was on a dozer, he was on a skid steer for people that didn't have insurance. Little rural area, required to push things into vegetative and non-vegetative brush piles. I'm on a dozer and watched, I come from the dirt works world, and I watched us not be able to light on fire in a rural area that every rancher, from your background, does on an everyday basis when they're cleaning up their property. We had to, at state, local, and federal expense, reimbursed, bring in 18-wheelers with half rounds, take an excavator, track hoe to load that non-vegetative timber in the back of that, haul it off ground somewhere to bury it with another dozer or a track hoe. Between the trucking, the dozer, the excavator, 4 times the cost because, and I ran as a state senator, a new law trying to get state control of that, and we could not get agency heads in Oklahoma to agree because they were concerned we would lose FEMA reimbursement if we had state control over it. Loss of efficiency. Grateful to you all for your leadership, common sense, returning, not chaos, which was the former state before you got in this position. Thank you.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Crane, for 5 minutes.
I want to thank you, Ms. Noem, for coming here today and giving us your testimony. I also want to thank you for the amazing work that yourself and everybody at Homeland Security have done to not only secure our border within just a couple weeks, but also to start deporting folks that aren't supposed to be here in the first place. Secretary Noem, I'm very concerned about the behavior of one of my colleagues on this very committee who we saw assaulting both verbally and physically federal law enforcement officers just last week on national television. Ms. Noem, what kind of message do you think it sends to the country and radical political agitators that she sits here today, not being charged for a crime, to participate in today's hearing?
Well, Congressman, I believe that what you saw last Friday at Delaney Hall was not oversight. I believe that it was breaking into a federal facility and assaulting law enforcement officers. This Congresswoman was surrounded by people who were criminals that were taking criminal actions. And so we need to be honest about what happened there. And we also need to talk about the fact that we have always facilitated visits and tours of federal facilities. We would continue to do that as well. And we would encourage that they work with us to do that in the future rather than to do the unprecedented destructive actions that the Congresswoman and her colleagues engaged in last Friday.
Ms. Noem, do you think her presence here today emboldens others to behave in the very same way?
I think it would be sad if that's the testimony of what happened last Friday that gets perpetuated. I was shocked when I watched it and saw it and was extremely discouraged to see that that the colleagues that surround those three defend them. Because those actions, we wouldn't want our kids to act that way, our children, our grandchildren to act that way. That's not the America that we dreamed and envisioned for our country. America should be a land of opportunity and where laws are enforced, and there's consequences for breaking the law.
Thank you. Ms. Noem, are you familiar with Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2 of the Constitution that covers the suspension of the writ of habeas corpus?
Yes.
It says that the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless, when cases of rebellion or invasion, the public safety may require it. Are you aware of which presidents have suspended the writ of habeas corpus?
I know that President Lincoln did.
Yeah, also Roosevelt and President Grant. You testified under oath, I believe, that the Biden administration allowed an invasion into our country. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So do you think it falls under the constitutional guidelines that I just read to you?
I'm not a constitutional lawyer, but I believe it does.
You've also witnessed that the Democrats here today and also radical activist judges are trying to halt and deny the president's agenda to carry out his constitutional duties to keep Americans safe and carry out his promise to the American people to secure the border and carry out mass deportations of those who have entered the country illegally. Knowing this, are you open and supportive of this constitutional option to suspend the writ of habeas corpus to keep Americans safe and carry out the president's agenda?
Well, this is something that's not in my purview to weigh in on. This is the president's prerogative to pursue, and he has not indicated to me that he will or will not be taking that action.
I want to thank Rogan O'Hanley for his efforts to bring this constitutional solution into the national conversation. Now I want to shift gears real quick. Ms. Noem, on May 5th, 2025, I joined Congressman Zinke and 8 of my fellow Republican colleagues in asking why it was appropriate for DOD and DHS to require real IDs for entry into Arlington National Cemetery.
I did see that letter this week, sir.
My question, what information can you share on the security posture of Arlington Cemetery that require real ID?
Well, sir, I'm not certain as to the procedures and the requirements at Arlington Cemetery. I do know that real ID at our airports for travel was required by statute and law change over 20 years ago. So that has been implemented on May 7th, and we have over 90% compliance that has happened at our airports since then. And overwhelmingly, the vast majority of travelers have had a real ID and have utilized that or a federally recognized ID going forward. But as far as what is required at Arlington Cemetery, I have not been in the knowledge of what those requirements are.
In that case, would you consider taking a look at that and also consider recommending repealing that requirement?
I can certainly take a look at that and follow up with a conversation with you, absolutely.
Thank you. I yield back.
The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Ogles, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here. You know, Mr. Chairman, you know, we've spent the last few hours with some of our colleagues defending rapists, murderers, individuals who committed a variety of crimes, and yet I don't believe a single one has asked about the 300,000 children that have been lost in our nation. I don't think a single one of them asked about Lake and Riley's family, or the young girls that recently have been reported between the ages of 12 and 14 that have been raped in Louisiana, Iowa, New York, and other states. And so as we sit here and have this conversation, let's level set about who we're really talking about. We're talking about criminals and thugs. And so let's get back to the reality of who these people are, and not to mention the fact that if they come here illegally, their first action when they come into this country is in fact a criminal act. Now, Madam Secretary, we've heard a lot of misinformation and rapid fire. Let's see if we can't set the record straight on a few things. When it comes to detention centers and oversight provided to Congress, does that oversight provision allow members of Congress to break into detention centers?
No, sir, I don't believe.
Does that oversight authority give members of Congress the right to assault members of law enforcement?
No, sir.
Madam Secretary, is assaulting a member of law enforcement a crime?
Yes.
I would urge, Mr. Chairman, that this committee look into anyone in Congress who has assaulted a member of law enforcement and the respective actions be taken as necessary, looking at the totality of the circumstances. Regards to FEMA, it's my understanding, you can correct me if I'm wrong, upon taking the helm, you discovered that there were a variety of unpaid claims, some of those going back 10 to 20 years.
Absolutely.
It is also my understanding that under the vision of President Donald Trump and your leadership, you plan to change the response time from 10 to 20 years to 6 months.
That is true.
Madam Secretary, as someone who was formerly a county executive, whose one of my departments was in fact emergency management, I can tell you that it will be a necessary and very useful as states and communities look to be reimbursed. Let's turn to Nashville, which is part of my district. Under your leadership, Homeland Security and ICE has conducted a variety of raids. Recently, 95, I do believe, of which were arrested who had previous criminal charges. 31 of which were previously deported and snuck back into this country. One of those was a sexual predator. So again, let's level set as to who we are talking about. We're talking about criminals and thugs who have no business being in our country. That being said, instead of thanking you and your leadership and thanking the president, the mayor of Nashville criticized and attacked law enforcement verbally. He then instructed members of law enforcement to report any communication with federal authorities. He then directed the Police Community Oversight Board to direct citizens to file complaints against law enforcement if they cooperate with federal law enforcement. Considering we've seen a 400% increase against federal law enforcement, do these types of statements and actions by a municipal leader concern you?
Yes, absolutely. They perpetuate the violence against law enforcement officers. And what happens many times then is that our agents within the Department of Homeland Security go into situations with no backup, with no local response of people who know the communities, know the routes, the roads, or the needs to emergency services that may be there. So it absolutely makes them much more vulnerable to a situation to which their lives could be in jeopardy.
Yes, ma'am, and if a municipal leader is found to be aiding and abetting illegal immigrants to evade federal law enforcement, would that be a criminal act?
Yes, I believe it would, sir.
And if elected officials impede ICE or Homeland Security in doing their job and pursuing illegal immigrants, would that be a criminal act?
I believe so.
Madam Secretary and Mr. Chairman, I will be asking the Committee of Homeland Security and Judiciary to be looking into the mayor of Nashville and any collusion or impeding of federal authorities and conducting their work in the city of Nashville. I would also encourage this committee and judiciary to look at other leaders, municipal leaders across the country, as they obstruct this administration, this Madam Secretary and her employees in doing their constitutional job, which is uphold the rule of law. Madam Secretary, I thank you and I yield back.
Is the gentleman trying to offer a motion or what?
I'm not. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from South Carolina for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to Secretary Noem for being here. So I represent the 3rd District of South Carolina, and we're happy about the work that you and your team have done and continue to do to secure our border. It's very important. I mean, we could sit here all day and talk about the fentanyl crisis and the trafficking, and it does affect each and every one of us. So you've made it clear that securing the border is not just a national security issue, but it's a financial one. Can you speak to how these enforcement gains translate into tangible cost savings for American taxpayers and counties in Middle America where local law enforcement have had to bear the strain of dealing with these cartel-fueled crime and just as the fentanyl and the trafficking that I mentioned as well?
Yes, the partnerships we've been able to build as a federal agency with local law enforcement and with state law enforcement has been key to helping make communities much safer in the last several months. Those state officials are so grateful to have someone come alongside them and help them address the public safety concerns and threats that they have and that they've been living with for the last several years. And so we have created through the 287G program, there's also other programs out there to where we operate in a task force model to go out and do enforcement operations, but also to bring consequences for those that are criminally breaking our laws. Many times you have in areas where these people have committed multiple crimes and been re-released. In fact, in some sanctuary cities, that's still happening, where people have committed acts of murder or rape that are still out on the loose, but because local law enforcement isn't addressing the issue, we haven't been able to capture those individuals yet. So we're always grateful for law enforcement that cares about their community and will step up and help protect them from these violent criminals.
Well, great, thank you. And I know you've worked hard with Governor McMaster, and he appreciates your efforts as well. My next question, as part of your broader effort to return DHS to its core mission, are there specific TSA programs or administrative functions under review for potential reforms or streamlining or maybe even consolidation? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, we're working to help TSA get the technology it needs to do better screening at airports and to make it much more streamlined for the passengers. I think everybody that I meet has some story of frustration that they've had at an airport or while traveling or in security lines. I would say just a few, but I would say that the technology needs that TSA has have been neglected for far too long. So having exit lanes covered by gates instead of individuals would streamline it and help us secure the systems faster, making sure that we have the processes in place to streamline luggage and passengers without the need to take things out of bags and to take off shoes are things that are possible, but we need to invest in them. And that would not only help our transportation security officers be able to focus on their responsibilities, but it also would make it a much better experience for families that are trying to use our federal air system.
Well, thank you. I also serve on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, and I look forward to hearing about what's around the corner as well with that committee.
Yes.
And thank you for being here. Thanks again today, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. McKenzie from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for joining us here today. I would first like to start by thanking you for the incredible job that you've done securing our southern border in just the first 100 days of the Trump administration. Seeing a 90% decrease in encounters and apprehensions is an incredible job and is a testimony to your leadership and the leadership that we're seeing in this administration. There are two things that I would like to talk about today. First, sanctuary cities, and second, protecting American workers. What we see and hear in this committee today is the defense of violent, illegal immigrant criminals in our local communities. They are more focused on defending these violent criminals from deportation than they are on protecting American citizens in our local communities. And this plays out all across the country. In my local community in Northampton County, they have signed an Executive Order 2028, which bans ICE from arresting illegal immigrants when they're going through processing for a separate crime. And what this means in practice is that when ICE wants to go arrest a violent member of Tren de Aragua or a domestic abuser who is going through the processing in our local community, they cannot go inside that courthouse and actually arrest that person. They have to stake out the courthouse outside, taking up hours of resources from law enforcement, potentially leaving our community more vulnerable. If that person were to go out a different exit of the courthouse and escape into our local community, they would be free to rain terror all across our beautiful Lehigh Valley. So when we see people talking about due process, and when we hear about upholding the rule of law, there are people all across this country who want to defend sanctuary city status in violation of federal law. In violation of federal law, yet they want to stand here as hypocrites and say that they are doing the defense of due process and upholding the rule of law. So my question to you, Madam Secretary, is what can we do to hold these people accountable, elected officials which are placing Americans in jeopardy all across our country?
Yeah, in sanctuary cities and states across the country, they tie the hands of us to respond to the needs of the local community members. In many of them, even our law enforcement agents can't do their jobs because they're not allowing them into state-run facilities or to courthouses or to areas where they could interdict these criminals that at times are often violent criminals. We had an instance just recently where a murderer that committed a murder has been on the loose in a community, and that is a sanctuary city, and we're not able to find this individual yet because we have a lack of cooperation from local law enforcement. It not only endangers the public, but it endangers those officers. They go out there every day, and they live in those communities too. This is where their kids go to school, and they go to church, and where they live, and they're demonized because of the defense that these individuals and members of this committee on the Democrat side perpetuate by defending criminals over their constituents. And so it's disheartening, but the responsibility of immigration laws and enforcement lies with the federal government, and we will continue to pursue law and order as long as President Trump is in the White House.
Well, I appreciate that, and I look forward to working with you to figure out how we can hold these local elected officials accountable to their actions, which endanger the safety of people all across our communities. Because ultimately, when we see bad policy like this, somebody is going to get hurt on the other end, and there needs to be accountability at the end of the day. The second thing I would like to talk about is protecting American workers. There have been numerous reports about how visas are being abused by foreign workers who come into our country, and then through things like the H-1B visa, for instance, are here doing short-term work as non-legal citizens, taking away jobs from American workers in places like the trucking industry. We've also heard about the hundreds of thousands of children that the Biden administration lost track of during their administration. Many of them were placed into forced labor and child labor situations and dangerous situations like meatpacking. So I would like to hear what the department is doing to crack down on these terrible behaviors and practices that went unchecked for many years during the Biden administration.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're partnering with all of our other federal agencies in a way that's really unprecedented to go after individuals that trafficked our children, that were involved in those operations, and then also to gather up their affiliates as well. You know, the Department of Health and Human Services is responsible for our refugee program, so adding integrity to that is very important, and make sure that when children come into our system, they may come in illegally or were trafficked in the past, that we're caring for them and returning them back to their families and to safe situations is very important. When you look at our visa programs, it's the Department of State that decides if a visa should be allocated to someone. It's the Department of Homeland Security that enforces that, that takes action on that. And we will continue to make sure that these programs are on task to why they were created, that they're being utilized for individuals who truly do love our country and recognize the opportunities our country provides them.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Thanadar for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Chair and Ranking Member. Secretary Noem, the Constitution of the United States establishes a federal government divided into 3 branches. It is Congress that makes the laws, the President who takes care that the laws are faithfully executed, and it is the Judicial Department that says what the law is. The constitutional separation of powers and system of checks and balances is necessary for the protection of liberty, and any violation undermines the rights and liberties of everyone in the United States. The Trump administration has repeatedly ignored the federal courts, including the Supreme Court. President Trump has even said that, and I quote, doesn't know, end quote, whether he has to uphold the Constitution. The President of the United States said, doesn't know. Secretary Noem, is it the policy of the Department of Homeland Security to follow orders issued by federal courts?
Yes, we are following all federal court orders.
So the answer is yes?
We are following all federal court orders, yes.
Well, as just one of the many examples, a federal judge required FEMA, and I quote, immediately cease, in the code, efforts to withhold disbursement of federal grant funding appropriated by Congress. The court later found evidence that FEMA, an agency under your purview, was in direct violation of the court orders. So court orders were not followed, as you see. Yes or no?
We are following court orders. Grants are being reevaluated, but they are being obligated and appropriated according to how Congress has laid out.
Well, Secretary Noem, we all took an oath to uphold the laws and Constitution of the United States. It is a sad day that I have to sit here and issue a reminder. You and the Department of Homeland Security must respect the Constitution and the courts. Mr. Chairman, I want to yield my rest of my time to the gentleman from New York.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Goldman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Tanadar. Secretary Noem, your opening statement includes a lot of data and numbers, but it doesn't mention asylum. How many people have claimed asylum since January 21st of this year?
I don't have that number readily available to me right now, but I can get that for you.
Do you have a sense? Is it
I don't.
dozens, hundreds, thousands?
I don't.
You are aware, are you not, that asylum is a lawful pathway into the country?
I am.
And are you aware of how and why the United States implemented our asylum laws?
We grant asylum to individuals who are feeling threatened specifically by their government through violent activities that are perpetuated in their own home countries.
Right, and it was originally implemented because Jews fleeing from the Holocaust were not allowed to seek refuge in this country, even though they clearly had no country to go to and had nowhere else to go. And those Jews in the Holocaust were rounded up frequently by the Gestapo in Nazi Germany, a secret undercover police unit that we know rounded up the Jews and sent them to the gas chambers. One of the things that I want to address with you briefly is, I think you said your testimony was that agents who are wearing masks do so as part of their undercover disguise. Is that right?
Said if the need arises to where they have activities that require them to be undercover at times or to protect their identity to continue their work and their duties.
So if an
may be
agent
utilized.
is conducting an arrest and approaches an individual without their mask on, and then when alerted to being videotaped, puts their mask on, that's not to protect their identity from the individual who's being arrested, right?
It could be, Congressman. I don't know the specifics of the situation.
Is it the
you're
policy of
referencing,
the
but it
Department of Homeland Security now that undercover ICE agents are permitted to wear face masks when executing their official duties?
Sir, it is allowed that they can if it protecting their
Is it in the
identity is an
policies?
imperative
Do
part
you
of
address
their-
face masks in the
I'll have
policies?
to look and see if it's in our written policies.
Because
I'm not
it's
certain, but
quite
it's
ironic, and I agree with the administration that is trying to ban face masks from anti-Semitic protests on campus, and yet our own law enforcement are wearing face masks to hide their identities.
We are implementing the exact same policies that Joe Biden had in place for his.
That is not any policy that I was
did
aware
not
of when I
change any
worked
of
with
the
the Department of Homeland Security.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman's time has expired. I recognize Mr. Knott for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madam Secretary, thank you for your testimony today. And as someone who worked with law enforcement at every level, I know the dangers that they face, and I know the reasons why they wear those masks. And equating ICE agents to anti-Semitic mobs is a disgusting analogy, and I'm sorry this committee just asked you those questions. But in regards to the threat that our country faces relating to the open border and the ill effects from it, I can't help but hear the silence when we hear the other side of the aisle. There is no protest to the open border. There's no protest to, at minimum, 10 million, up to maybe 15 or 20 million people who came to the country. I worry in some ways that we are becoming desensitized to all of the problems because there are so many. You know, surges in overdose deaths from fentanyl, surges in violence. We see compounding numbers of people who are terrorists coming into the country. I've heard testimony from this very committee that there were dozens, if not hundreds of miles of border that were ordered to not be enforced over the last administration. So we don't know who's here. And whether it's hostile actors from China, Cuba, Venezuela, other hostile countries, whether in the Middle East or all over the world, we know that they sent people to exploit the open border policies of the last administration. Yes, drug trafficking, yes, human trafficking, yes, violence is all part of that, but so are threats that go well beyond that, terrorist, national security threats, et cetera. And if we made perfect border policy from this point forward, we would still have a huge problem because of what the Biden administration did in your position. How can we as a committee help you get ahead of this problem and to make sure that the solutions continue to unfold years into the future, which is what will be required?
Well, a couple of things. One of the things that I think was most tragic of the last administration is they even prevented us from having data to start with.
Yep.
For instance, President Trump in his first administration opened the Voices office at ICE, which gave victims of illegal immigrant crime an opportunity to get information, to have support systems, to get case information, to know when that individual was in court, when they were going to be released. When President Biden became president, he shut that office down, which means that because it didn't exist, we don't truly know how many victims of illegal immigrant crime there are out there. We don't have the data. So continuing to have systems in place where you're bringing light to the fact that there are victims still out there and that people are still enduring criminal activity by illegal immigrants and that they shouldn't be prioritized over American citizens is very important. I would also say that making sure we have an opportunity to have the resources we need in order to do due diligence on enforcement operations and secure our border into the future is important, and then continue to highlight sanctuary cities and the danger that they are to our country, what they do to their families that live in them, that we aren't able to take enforcement actions that are efficient to really bring them justice.
In terms of the task force officers, ma'am, that is obviously a program that I, as a federal prosecutor, used. It's a force multiplier in a very profound way. In terms of the numbers that are allocated to the department that you lead, do we need more task force officers? Is it fine where it is? Is there room to grow? What would you say?
No, we're always looking for more partnerships. We have over 600 agreements in place now with state and local law enforcement agencies, which goes into over 6,000 officers out there that have been added to our ranks to help us out there with enforcement operations in states across the country. So now there is 6 states that this kind of partnership is not allowed. It's banned by the state government. So it would be helpful to have those addressed in those states so that we could form a partnership like this to compound our resources to really make sure we're bringing safety.
It might be worth reaching out to individual counties at some point, because
Yes.
I know within those states, there are numerous counties who are furious about those prohibitions from the governor's mansions.
Yes.
So that would be something that we would love to talk to you about. And I'll close with this, ma'am. Thank you for the work you're doing. I worked under the Biden administration. It was overwhelming. And again, we have a serious problem for years to come just because of that 1 4-year term. And if we can be of service to this committee, please reach out to us. And again, thank you for the work that you and President Trump are doing.
Appreciate
I yield
that.
back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now, I think, recognize our last member making comments today. Mr. Garcia, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Madam Secretary. And you said that you're committed to complying with the Constitution, which we of course all appreciate and think is important. Now, we all know that the Fifth Amendment states, and I just want to be very clear, that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Fifth Amendment. Just to be clear in a simple yes or no, this actually says person. Is that correct, Madam Secretary?
Correct.
Thank you. And you are aware that person has been defined by the Supreme Court repeatedly multiple times means citizens and non-citizens. Simple yes or no, is that correct?
Correct, I believe.
Thank you. In an April 7th ruling just recently, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed, and I'll quote, "It is well established that the Fifth Amendment entitles aliens to due process under the law in the context of removal proceedings." But of course, the Department deported 230 people to be imprisoned indefinitely in a brutal prison. We've deported U.S. citizens, as noted today, children without proper reasonable protections. We've illegally arrested students. And we know that just one of these students was released just last week, and you were mandated to do so. Now, the Fifth Amendment is clear. Madam Secretary, you committed to uphold the Constitution, is that correct?
Yes,
Thank you. And you now, of course, commit to following the Fifth Amendment, is that correct?
yes.
Thank you. Now, Madam Secretary, you are violating that amendment as we speak, and you are breaking your oath. You are deporting people, and the department is deporting people without due process. We cannot deport U.S. citizens. Without due process, there is nothing that Donald Trump could essentially be stopped in grabbing people off the street. That's happening today. Now, maybe someone in government might not like your tattoos. Maybe they don't like how somebody votes. Maybe they don't want to see how someone represents your constituents in Congress. But if you can't see a judge, no one can protect you. And I hope that you and I and everyone here can agree with that. And apparently, not even the Supreme Court actually matters when it comes to the case, of course, of Kilmar Garcia. But let's remember that we're not just deporting people. We're sending some of them to be locked up in one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. Now, Madam Secretary, you've heard this case today, but I have to speak about it one more time. I think it's really important. This is Andrew Romero. He had an appointment to come to this country to claim asylum. We gave him that appointment. The United States government gave him his asylum appointment. He comes for his appointment. He passes a credible fear interview. He's a gentle person as described by his family. He's openly gay. He was leaving his country for persecution of being gay. He did everything right, claimed asylum, that was legal. And then we sent him to a dangerous prison at the border with no due process. There are claims about his tattoos. He has his parents' names on his tattoos and 2 crowns that relate to a festival back in his hometown. We are paying to lock this young gentleman up forever. What I would ask is the ambassador in El Salvador, we have asked for proof of life of Andrew. He has had no access to lawyers or family since he has been taken over a month now. No one knows if he's even alive. His mother just wants to know if he is alive. So my ask to you, Madam Secretary, is the same that I asked the ambassador. Can we do a proof of life check on Andrew just to see if he is alive?
Congressman, we are utilizing the tools that Congress has given us to apply due process to individuals. We are doing that for every person, and we are making sure that we're following what you have given us as far as guidance and how things should be implemented.
Would you commit to just letting his mother know, as a mother to mother, if Andrew is alive? He was given an asylum appointment by the United States government. We gave him an appointment. We said, Andrew, come to the border at this time to claim asylum. He was taken to a foreign prison in El Salvador. His mother just wants to know if he is alive. Can we check and do a wellness check on him?
Our asylum applications are different than the granting of asylum, and I don't know the specifics of this individual case. This individual is in El Salvador, and the appeal would be best made to the president and to the government of El Salvador on this.
We've
This
made
is
that.
not under my jurisdiction, and
Madam Secretary, you have said that CCOT in El Salvador is one of the tools in the toolbox that you have. You have said that and been quoted as saying that. You and the president have the ability to check if Andrew is alive and if not being harmed. Would you commit at least into looking and asking El Salvador if he is alive?
This is a question that's best asked to the president and the government of El Salvador.
And I think you know very well that you could ask that question. What you are choosing to do, Madam Secretary, is disregard this young man's life, this young man's family, who was given an appointment by the United States. I think it is shameful that you won't even request to see if this young man is alive. His family has no idea, has no access to lawyers. I would hope that we would have the humanity to just check if this young man is okay. With that, I yield back. It's shameful.
Gentleman yields. I think we've covered everyone. Mr. Ranking Member, you're recognized for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to associate myself with Mr. Garcia's statement. I can't believe that we would send somebody or anyone from our country somewhere else and say, well, we cut off all communication. We're a better country than that. And I just thank Mr. Garcia for raising that question. Secretary Noem, at the start of this hearing, you stood here and took an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Then you sat down and dodged the truth over and over and over for a little more than 3 hours. So help you God. You repeatedly testified that you and the Department of Homeland Security will follow the Constitution, the laws, and the order of the Supreme Court. Well, the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And yet, a federal court found that the Department of Homeland Security, under your watch, believes that it has a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process. So you did not tell the truth to this committee today when you said you would follow the Constitution and comply with due process. You also testified that you follow orders of the Supreme Court of the United States and all courts. But the Supreme Court unanimously directed the government to facilitate the return of Kilmar Garcia to the United States. But you just testified before this committee that Kilmar Garcia will never return to the United States. So you didn't tell the truth to this committee again when you said that you comply with court orders and decisions. You've overseen the deportation of U.S. citizen children and have claimed that their parents chose to take their children with them. But you produce no evidence that the mother, let alone both parents, of those children freely gave consent to have their children deported from the United States. In fact, everyone involved in those cases say that the mothers, in fact, did not want their children, especially their sick American children, deported. In fact, your agency lured families to ICE appointments under false pretenses, lied to them, refused to let them speak with an attorney or children's father, and deported them before a court had time to even hear the case. You've given yourself the unilateral right to deport anyone you deem a threat. You refuse to comply with court orders that try to stop you. That puts all of us at risk. Beyond your false testimony about the administration's deportation policies, you falsely stated that the administration is focused on a full range of DHS's missions. Instead, your budget request appears to reflect a view that DHS's sole purpose is to be a border wall construction agency that deports U.S. citizen children with cancer. Your budget proposed cuts to cybersecurity, emergency preparedness, and aviation security. Even before asking Congress for these budget cuts, you've overseen mass reductions in the workforce at CISA and FEMA. Despite repeated requests from this committee on how many people have been fired or have been bullied into quitting before their tenure, DHS has refused to share that information. So it should worry every American that we do not know how many people are left at FEMA to respond to disasters and how many cyber defenders still work at CISA as China and other adversaries attack our systems every day. And you made clear in response to my questioning, you have no written plans for FEMA. It is very apparent that also is no plan for CISA, where you are trying to gut the agency's funding and falsely claiming that CISA is a censorship agency. Since CISA never censored anyone, but now we are all paying the price for you buying into a baseless conspiracy theory. Secretary Noem, I'm glad that you finally came to testify before this committee, but I'm disappointed, along with a lot of my Democratic colleagues, that you stood here and took an oath to tell the truth, then repeatedly failed to do so to this committee. Let me just say, if you dance with the devil long enough, he's liable to follow you home. I hope that you will stop dancing around the truth and start telling the truth so this committee can do its work, helping to defend DHS from the attacks you've launched against it. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I want to make a clarification here because there's been so many incredibly false and misleading things said today. Once a deportation order has been issued, the due process is over. The due process occurs prior to that, where the judge makes a decision with the information, oftentimes the help of NGOs, sometimes in the past funded by the federal government. But the judge issues an order, and there's well over 1 million people in this situation that are being deported appropriately. No lawyer is offered at that point. The judge has made a decision. The due process has already occurred. It's really important to make that point. People are not inhuman or violating the law. They're following the law. They're executing an order that's been presented by a judge. I saw a meme somewhere this week that said a society that makes war on its law enforcement better learn how to make friends with its criminals. You know, I've said this before, the left has this incredible heart for the criminal. They defend the criminal, a full-throated defense of criminals over the safety of Americans and the following of the rule of law. We've even seen the defense of a congresswoman who threw a punch at a police officer. I mean, that's unconscionable. You know, if I was a 100% politician, and I'm not, but if I was a 100% politician, I'd be happy with that. Why? Because that's exactly the reason they lost every single swing state in the recent election, the border. This full-throated defense of criminals and the punching of law enforcement in the face. It's why they lost every single swing state, and Republicans gained in almost every state more votes than we'd ever gotten before. Because the American people recognize who the good guy really is. And it ain't Tren de Agua. Or a guy who was driving 8 women, young women, through my state, and the Biden administration said, do not detain him. As I've said before, the left doesn't know a good guy from a bad guy. They street violent criminals and they want to defund ICE. That's been their mantra since I've been in this position. It's ridiculous. It's heinous. And yes, if I were a pure politician, I'd say keep going, guys. But what it does is it breaks my heart. I am a combat veteran, and I have a kindred connection to those law enforcement agencies and agents who put their ass on the line, their lives on the line for our safety. And we're fussing about whether or not the guy has a mask on to protect his identity when he's an undercover agent. I don't know how many people made an issue out of that. Give me a break. Want to cut a deal with Iran, destabilize the Middle East, punch Saudi Arabia in the face, we get an imbalance, and what happens? An invasion of Israel. They don't know a good person from a bad person. That's why the American people said, we don't want them in charge. Again, if I were a pure politician, I'd say, keep going, guys. But it's a spit in the face to the men who wear that uniform. It's a charade. That's what it is. It's a charade. To say something about law enforcement and turn around and be okay with a U.S. Congresswoman punching a police officer in the back. It's infuriating. Madam Secretary, you have done a remarkable job. And what's happening now is the criminals and the cartels have stopped making billions of dollars trafficking human beings into our country. Thank you for that. And the texts and tweets that I've gotten from Border Patrol and the texts and tweets I've gotten from law enforcement all across this country during this hearing support everything I'm saying. Thank you. And I charge you to keep going. Keep doing it. That judge executes that removal order, get them out of here. They've had their due process. And you will have our full-throated support as you continue to do so. And we will work very hard to get reconciliation passed so you have the resources and we can codify the common sense policies that this president has enacted with your leadership. Thank you for being here. Thank the staff for all the work they do to put these on. We stand adjourned.
Let me know if there's.
Well. She is nothing but 100% liar. I just want to say a couple things. Number one, she said some outrageous number of countries. As a matter of fact, let me try to find it.
The criminals and the rapists, and now we finally have a president in the White House.
Ashamed to be an American. And so what was great about that, it was that we were actually taking care of those children, unlike what happened under the Biden administration where we lost about 300,000 of them.
That's a lie.
Will you
They have, oh, that's just a lie. It's a lie.
second on what the judiciary branch has said about this case? We know the Supreme Court has said 9-0 that notwithstanding your statements under oath here today, that Mr. Kilmar Abreu Garcia was afforded due process, he was in fact not afforded due process, because then if he were, you would have seen the withholding order that did not permit him to be deported to El Salvador. Now you allege, and I guess the Attorney General alleges, that he's a member of MS-13. That may very well be, that very well may be the case. And if he is, now that that is a foreign terrorist organization, certainly the immigration laws would allow him, and in fact require him, to be deported. I certainly would support that. But the problem that we have here is what you allege, what Ms. Green alleges, what the Attorney General alleges, is not the judiciary. You don't get to decide whether or not he is an MS-13 member. And you don't have to take my word for it, because Judge Wilkinson, a Fourth Circuit judge, very conservative, addressed this argument. He says, the government asserts that Abreu Garcia is a terrorist and a member of MS-13. Perhaps, but perhaps not. Regardless, he is still entitled to due process. If the government is confident in its position, it should be assured that position will prevail in proceedings to terminate the withholding of removal order. Will you commit right now to give Mr. Abreu Garcia that process where you can prove your allegation that he is a member of MS-13?
Congressman, that judge that you just quoted did not say he was not a member of MS-13. Who did say that he was a member of MS-13 was law enforcement officers that encountered this individual.
Yeah, he knows that. This is a Fourth Circuit judge. He knows all of what the evidence is, and he's saying if that evidence... So you're not going to commit to follow this order? You won't commit to follow this court order?
By the way, he identified
Madam Secretary,
himself.
I reclaim my time. Stop filibustering. Stop filibustering.
By gang members of MS-13.
Will you give Mr. Abreu Garcia the due process that the Supreme Court and Judge Wilkinson has required you to give him?
Abreu Garcia is an El Salvador resident who is in his home country. If he were to come back to this country, he would be immediately removed again.
How do you know?
He has received and been treated appropriately.
So
and he is not.
How can you say he's been treated appropriately if the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0? 9-0 that he hasn't been treated appropriately. Why is your opinion better and have more authority than the Supreme Court?
Investigators, 2 judges, an immigration court that all said he was MS-13. and was removed from this country.
But you understand, that is you saying that. That is you saying that.
That is them saying that. This
No,
is
no, no, no.
investigators and law
That is
enforcement
you
officers
making
in
that
the case they built
determination.
against him. If you don't
The
trust our law
court
enforcement
has
officers
considered all that.
and
The judge has
investigators,
considered all that,
then
Madam
who do you
Secretary.
trust if you
And
don't
if you would be
trust judges?
quiet, because I'm reclaiming my time, you are not following this court order. But let's focus on the court order, because this opinion also says that to facilitate, which the Supreme Court is requiring, is an active verb. It requires that steps be taken. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia to allow him to get due process?
Abrego Garcia is in his home country.
What
If he were to come
steps
back
have
into your
you taken?
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him. I'm advocating for a court order, Madam Secretary. The court order says that you must take steps to follow the court order. You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant to this court order?
It's got to be extremely discouraging to be one of your constituents. To see you fight for a terrorist like this and not fight for them is extremely alarming to me.
I'm fighting for due process, and that's under the Constitution.
Gentleman's
and you
time
should
has
fight due
expired.
process.
The gentleman's time has expired. I now recognize Ms. Green for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Democrats have spent the last 4 years terrorizing Americans with their open border policies. They flooded our communities with over 13 million illegals from over 170 countries and territories who invaded our borders.
I gotta hear how many countries she says.
Yes, absolutely. We know that there was upwards to over...
Constitution gives Congress the power of the purse.
Should be censored by their government for their political beliefs and their
Absolutely.
statements. Thank you for that. Through their NGO partnerships, tickets were created of 2024 under the Biden administration.
You are here under oath. What steps have you taken to return Mr. Abrego Garcia pursuant?
None. She's taken none. None. No. 9.
To this court order.
It's got to be extremely
Would you please provide an update on your efforts to investigate the severity of MDM efforts during the Biden regime, and what steps are you taking to ensure CISA will never again serve as the United States government's? Would you please provide the criminals and the rapists, and now we finally have a president in the White House?
Because I'm reclaiming my time.
If your continued advocacy for him were to...
I'm not advocating for him.
Through their NGO partnerships, tickets were created they thought were misinformation territories who invaded our borders, raped our women.
The due process steps be taken. What step?
That according to CBP, only 5 aliens were temporarily released into the United States in all of April. Only 5. This is compared to the 68,000 released in April of 2024 under the Biden administration. Thank you, Secretary Noem, for your great work and your leadership. This is truly saving America. There's nothing Democrats love more than defending the cartels, the criminals and the rapists, and now we finally have a president in the White House and an administration that defends the American people. As you're aware, Secretary Noem, CISA previously developed a censorship laundering scheme through its counter mis, dis, and malinformation, MDM, efforts that suppress conservative opinions and went after President Trump's supporters, members of Congress, senators, including myself, were permanently banned. I was permanently banned on Twitter under this. What started as an election interference campaign eventually developed into censoring issues well beyond the election and COVID and climate change. Through their NGO partnerships, tickets were created on posts they thought were misinformation and subsequently sent to social media platforms with recommendations for them to be censored. Would you please provide an update on your efforts to investigate the severity of MDM efforts during the Biden?
Well, I'm not going to get to where I wanted to. So, thanks for hanging with me, Nikki B. Well, there's only 190 countries, I do believe, somewhere around there, maybe a little less. But she said some absurd number and of countries. And I'm just like, there's not that many countries. It was over 1,000. So, I'm not happy with her opinion, I guess, is where I want to go. On all of her answers are just wrong. Wrong. You can't just pick up somebody and take them willy-nilly. And she totally wouldn't answer any of the questions. I would hate to be her and be guilty, and she's the head of our security. You better get a gun. Bye.